So picture this, our MC is sitting in class and he's already clocked something most people around him haven't. Awakened people in this era, genuinely, embarrassingly weak. And the reason for that is pretty simple, the world had been way too peaceful for way too long. So what you get is a handful of students who are just slightly stronger than everyone else, and immediately start using that to throw their weight around, shaking down their classmates for cash. Classic bully behavior. Our MC didn't even bother remembering who this particular bully was, but the guy's arrogance, that was hard to miss. So massive, so suffocating that he didn't even pretend to respect the teachers, not even a little. The bully got annoyed the second our MC stepped in his way and shoved him aside like he was nothing. Later though, the teacher pulled him aside and told him she had high expectations for him. Then came the moment of truth, stepping into the awakening room to find out which element he carried. And what he got was not what anyone expected. It was all of them, every single element, and on top of that, every time he levels one up, he gets a brand new random class to go with it. Yeah, that's completely broken, in the best way possible. Infinite awakening power sitting right there inside him. The catch, every single stat started at 0, clean slate, no head start. Which meant his very first class selection had to be calculated, no room for mistakes, so when he finally walked out of the room, the other students immediately jumped on him for taking so long inside. Teacher Huang, meanwhile, was practically buzzing with excitement. So our MC did what any tactically minded person would do. He killed the hype dead and told her his class, Core Warrior, one of the worst classes you could possibly roll. He braced himself for the mockery, fully expected to be told to accept failure and move on. But this teacher, she had a heart bigger than anyone in that room could have anticipated. She looked him dead in the eye and said effort matters more than talent. That's when the bully decided to make his grand reappearance, stepping forward and saying right in front of everyone that the whole speech was fake. He even had the audacity to tell the teacher that she should know better, since she herself only had mediocre talent. And that's exactly why she ended up as just a teacher. Our MC felt genuine fury for the first time since this whole thing started, but the teacher just took it, let herself be insulted in front of her own class without flinching. The bully drove the point home, your class level determines the entire trajectory of your life. And anyone weak, anyone without talent, trash, simple as that. Then he went even further, suggesting the teacher could do well for herself if she started doing favors for someone powerful, someone like him. That was the moment our MC was done spectating. He reached out and crushed the cup right in the bully's hand, /. Now Hong Kai-young-shing. This guy was a natural talent who didn't even need the awakening room to unlock his powers. And he attacked our MC without a single thought for the consequences. Like zero concern for whether the kid lived or died, even the teacher couldn't move fast enough to intervene, but our MC kept his composure and blocked the entire attack using a blocking skill, clean execution. The bully's expression shifted in the span of a heartbeat because the attack hadn't just been stopped, it had been completely reflected. And Hong Kai-young-shing's arm paid the price. Chengxing got launched several meters backward from the impact. An absolute humiliating defeat, /. He genuinely could not process what had just happened to him, which honestly tracks. This wasn't a guy known for his big brain moments. Every student in that room was frozen in shock. The kid they'd written off as weak Bai Yi suddenly looked like a completely different person standing there. Power, confidence, it was radiating off him. And nobody in that room was more stunned than the teacher herself, because she had seen it happen with her own eyes and she knew exactly what it meant. The exclusive ability of the warrior class, material perception, operates at elite level. It blocks 100% of incoming damage and reflects it back to the attacker within 0.9 seconds. Elite warriors spend years trying to master that, most never do, but here's where things go much deeper than anyone in that classroom could have guessed. The truth is, Bai Yi had traveled back 20 years into the past. He is not a child. He is a man who lived every single second of the last 10 years leading the most powerful awakened team in the world. The Divine Squad. Their mission was to eradicate demonic layers operating under the highest authority known to exist. An authority called God, and the mission we're about to see, the 100th high-level layer the Divine Squad has ever faced. Among the squad's members is He Li, a lightning assassin. This particular mission is classified as Rank L Purification. Maximum difficulty, which makes her presence not just useful but absolutely critical for any chance of survival. The team also includes Han Xiaolin, the Cloud Mage, and despite how brutal the mission is, Bai Yi, the leader, had already decided something going into it. After this one, he was finally taking a vacation. Well-deserved, honestly. Rounding out the squad is Lucian, the star maestro, whose ability lets him amplify gravity up to 100 times, turning every attack into something catastrophic. And Bai Yi himself, known as the Sacred Swordsman, wielding his signature ability, the annihilation of 10 domains. Yeah, no wonder this man leads the squad. Together, they wrap up another mission, taking down the SSS rank Demon King, Belphegor. Han Xiaolin grumbles that it ended too fast and that he would have liked to savor it a little more. Lucian raises something more unsettling. For a top priority mission that required the entire squad, didn't it feel suspiciously easy? Bai Yi points out that the intel described the Demon King as special 5 elements plus a secret ability. Something didn't add up. Li moves closer to Bai Yi and asks if they're really getting that vacation. She mentions very casually that she'd love to go on a date with him. Bai Yi, equally casual, says the whole squad is going to their usual spot to celebrate together. Li laments that her move failed again, same result as always. Then Bai Yi notices something: one of his teammates never showed up for the mission. Lucian explains that the absent member had said he'd handle the remains, but he never appeared during the actual fight. Li complains that this keeps happening and that the captain really needs to start cracking down on absences. Right at that moment, someone slips into the area without a sound and activates what appears to be a purification mission. Then the attack comes. Han Xiaolin is the first one hit. The entire team is thrown into shock. Bai Yi tries to react and realizes he can't move his body at all. The attacker reveals it coldly. For the past month, Bai Yi's coffee had been laced with paralyzing agents every single day. Then he activates his ability, the Forbidden Tomb, and states plainly that to eliminate the strongest member of the group, everything had to be perfectly set up in advance. No margin for error. This man, who had spent years pretending to be an ally, now declares that it is God's will for all of them to be eliminated. And one by one, right in front of Bai Yi's eyes, the other members of the Divine Squad are taken out. Furious and broken, the leader demands to know why. Why is his former ally doing this? What kind of god would ever give an order like that? The traitor replies that his old captain is still as naive as ever, and attacks Bai Yi, saying that his god requires no reasons. Bai Yi fires back that they had been side by side for over 10 years, that he had considered this man practically family. The traitor tells him he still doesn't understand anything. He reveals that from the very day they met, God was already moving the pieces on the board. The entire squad, every last one of them, was nothing more than pawns. That's why he played the role of a friend, built trust, waited for the perfect moment to strike, and with that, the traitor confirms it. Every member of the Divine Squad has been eliminated. Mission complete, and after taking a direct hit from that final blow, Bai Yi wakes up somewhere else entirely. There, he comes face to face with a mysterious presence, one he recognizes immediately as Belphegor, which makes no sense to him because the Demon King should be dead. Belphegor, SSS rank Demon King, responds that he doesn't die so easily. He explains that this is his spiritual space and that the entire realm of Nea is his true vital essence. Getting straight to business, Belphegor puts a deal on the table. His special ability, Return of Life, can send someone back into the past, giving them the chance to correct everything that went wrong. So he asks, wouldn't Bai Yi want that? Bai Yi, standing there as their leader, thinks. He thinks about his companions. He recalls every good moment they shared together, all of it stolen from him by a traitor. And in that moment, the answer is clear: he wants revenge. Bai Yi declares it without hesitation. He will eliminate the traitor, and every god that traitor claims to serve. Belphegor accepts the answer and tells him to consider it a welcome gift. But Bai Yi isn't naive. He immediately asks what the price of this deal actually is. The Demon King just smiles, no answer, and then Bai Yi wakes up. He has returned to the year 2105 in the Holy Kingdom of Yi, a vassal state of Jiang. And as the reality of it sinks in, Bai Yi confirms what he already suspects: he has genuinely traveled back in time. Because he's standing in an elementary school, and at this point in time he hadn't awakened his powers yet. He was just a kid. The elementary school teacher wastes no time coming down on him, pointing out that he, as usual sloppy as ever, had just been caught sleeping through her entire explanation. As punishment, detention. Bai Yi sat there, still processing it all. The sheer reality of having traveled back in time hadn't fully settled yet. He was seeing faces he hadn't laid eyes on in over 20 years, and the whole situation felt completely and utterly surreal. Despite all of that, class carried on, teacher Huang up front like nothing had happened. She explained that in this world there existed 5 types of elemental powers: lightning, flower, cloud, core, and stellar. Every individual could only manifest one of these elements within their body. The teacher demonstrated her own power, which came from the rarest of the 5, cloud. Depending on how an element fused with a person's body, abilities fell into 3 distinct categories: combat, utility, and special. And when all 5 elements were combined, the resulting power was on a completely different level, as demonstrated by the most powerful guild the school had ever produced. The teacher told her students that they stood out among billions of people for carrying the potential to become awakened. And because of that, they had been celebrated since childhood. However, she warned them that the real test started today, because out there were roughly 100 other classes carrying the exact same potential as them. Classes were divided into 4 quality tiers: dust, firefly, abyss, and celestial light. And every single one of them would get only 1 shot at awakening their class. That afternoon would be the moment of definition. The result of that process would determine each person's standing in the world going forward. The moment class ended, she announced it was their turn to go through the awakening process and advised everyone to stay calm to avoid getting hurt. For his part, Baiyi reflected that there were 2 known ways to awaken. The first was natural awakening, the way it had happened with Hong Kyungshing, generally reserved for those with exceptional constitution and raw talent. At some peak moment of intense emotion, the awakening simply triggered on its own. The second method was through the awakening space room, a product of the combined intelligence of countless scientists. Inside, a person's adrenaline and emotions were pushed to their absolute maximum, inducing awakening in those with the potential for it. The catch: each person could only awaken once, and the result was always random, which is why for so many people that single moment was treated as the one and only chance to change the course of their entire life. After several students had gone through the process, it was finally Baiyi's turn. Before him lay the opportunity to select from any quality, any element, any profession, including the rarest and most powerful ones in existence. Baiyi thought back to the gift the Demon King had granted him. Now he understood what it meant: infinite awakening power. The system warned him once an initial profession was chosen, all elemental bars would be completely reset. This decision required patience. One wrong move and everything falls apart before it even begins. After making his choice, Baiyi finally stepped out of the room, and almost immediately, he got humiliated by the bully. Then things escalated, and even the teacher, the one with the incredible proportions, got dragged into it and humiliated too. That's when Baiyi stopped watching. He defended himself against the senior student's attack, using nothing but his defense, and the amount of damage he dealt back to the bully in return left everyone in the room completely speechless. Baiyi then revealed the class he had chosen: Core Warrior, because it came packaged with a starting sword that had genuinely solid attributes, a detail nobody else in that room had even considered. Core Warrior, a class everyone else had written off as garbage, chosen deliberately for reasons only someone with his knowledge could appreciate. Hong Changsheng dragged himself back up off the floor and declared that the kid had just gotten lucky and guaranteed it wouldn't happen a second time. Because unlike this brat, he possessed a truly powerful class, one that placed him on an entirely different level. Watching all of this unfold, Teacher Huang knew in her gut that what she had just witnessed was not luck, because she had seen it with her own eyes, her student blocking that strike at the exact millisecond before impact, and then retaliating with complete and total precision. Something that even she, as a trained teacher, would struggle to pull off. And on top of all that, this student had only awakened minutes ago. Someone with that little combat experience should not be capable of something like that. So how exactly had Baiyi done it? Back in the confrontation, Hong Changsheng declared that the kid needed to face the consequences of stepping out of line. He was going to personally teach him where he stood in this world. Baiyi, meanwhile, was thinking clearly. Choosing the weakest class would have been a catastrophic mistake for anyone who didn't have the knowledge he carried. That was why everyone was so thrown off. But Baiyi came from the future. He knew the attributes and hidden qualities of every single class out there, including the one he had just selected. Some of the students murmured amongst themselves, questioning whether this fight was actually going to happen, since using powers on school grounds was strictly forbidden. They suspected Hong Changsheng operated with that level of arrogance purely because of who his father was, a prominent government figure. Not to mention the school principal was his uncle. Bai Yi, on the other hand, was a nobody, and a lot of the students were already quietly assuming he might get expelled over this. The teacher, reading the situation clearly, stepped in and tried to calm things down before they spiraled further, but the bully had zero interest in letting it go. He declared that even if Bai Yi got on his knees and begged, the punishment wasn't stopping. Meanwhile, Bai Yi was running the math in his head. The real gap between class qualities came down to attribute bonuses, and those gaps were enormous. At dust quality, the bonus was 100%, meaning value stayed as is. Firefly quality pushed that to 150%. Abyss quality hit 200%, meaning right out of the gate an Abyss-level profession already had double the raw attributes of a Dust-level one. That gap in power wasn't just significant, it was, for most people, completely insurmountable. One of the nerdier students in the class had already done the mental math and concluded that Bai Yi was in serious trouble, clearly outclassed by the bully in every measurable way. He couldn't figure out why Bai Yi had chosen to confront someone so far above his newly awakened level. That student reflected quietly that the world they lived in was full of people who crushed others the moment they got the chance. And the only way to survive that kind of world was to swallow your pride. In his view, only those who knew when to yield could actually endure. Going head-on was the most reckless play possible. It only ever ended with the weaker person getting humiliated even harder. Back in the fight, the teacher had already mentally written off any chance of Bai Yi walking away from this unscathed. He'd managed to block the first attack, sure, but now Hong Changsheng was putting in real force. Counting on a clean, guaranteed win, Hong Changsheng announced that there was no way the kid could dodge this one. Bai Yi replied, completely calm, that he had no intention of dodging. Instead, he activated an ability called Ghost Step. The opponent's entire attack passed straight through Bai Yi like hitting air, and in the process, Hong Changsheng ended up cutting himself with his own blade. Even then, he refused to accept it, blaming Bai Yi, insisting that someone like him had no business winning. Every student in the room was completely lost trying to understand what they had just seen. Even Bai Yi's own teacher couldn't explain it. But the class representative, Kai Yin, who had been watching closely the entire time, had pieced it together. Bai Yi had activated the warrior's invincibility at the exact moment the attack landed, and immediately after, he used Ghost Step to phase through the strike entirely. Then with a single clean blow, he ended the fight without taking so much as a scratch. Kai Yin's conclusion was precise. Bai Yi didn't just know his class abilities, he had applied them flawlessly in live combat, and on top of all that, he did it without breaking a single school rule. Because technically the opponent had injured himself, Bai Yi, meanwhile, noticed that the fight had already netted him experience, and that the more enemies he took down going forward, the more points he'd have to work with. The problem was that to evolve at the pace he needed, he was going to have to start clearing dungeons, and soon. Still seething, the bully declared the fight wasn't over, and lunged to strike the protagonist from behind, a cheap shot completely out of nowhere, but someone arrived just in time to shut it down. It was Hong Liang, the school principal, and Hong Changsheng's uncle. He stated that his nephew had already embarrassed himself enough. As principal, he declared that the awakening process for the day was complete, everyone was to go home and rest. Then he turned to Bai Yi and reminded him that the school had strict rules that applied to everyone. But Bai Yi's mind was already somewhere else entirely. Because it had just fully hit him, returning this far back in time meant that all of his friends were still alive. And something else was gnawing at him. On the day of his original awakening, something massive had happened. Something he couldn't believe he had forgotten until now. It had been the most important event of that entire period of his life. Without another word, Bai Yi turned and ran, leaving the principal mid-sentence. Hong Liang turned to the teacher and told her to keep better control of her students. Teacher Huang apologized, and the principal said he'd let it slide this once, but made it very clear he didn't want to have this conversation again. Once alone in his office with his nephew, Hong Changsheng insisted the whole thing had been luck, that under any other circumstances he never would have lost. His uncle didn't buy a single word of it. He laid it out plainly. The instant Hong Changsheng moved toward the boy, Bai Yi had already activated Ghost Step and advanced level ability. And within a fraction of a second after that, he had identified the single most vulnerable point in Hong Changsheng's stance and shattered his defense completely. All of it done using only basic abilities. The principal stated that even with 15 years of actual combat experience, he doubted he could replicate what that boy had just pulled off. Watching the fight, he said, was like watching a seasoned professional casually dismantle a complete novice. That boy was nothing like what either of them had assumed. As for the protagonist himself, he was already sprinting through the city, his mind locked on something far more urgent than the fight he just walked away from. Beyond revenge, there was something he absolutely had to get to. The moment he reached home, the memories of what had happened in his past life came flooding back. And now he had one goal: stop it from happening again, no matter what it cost him. Stepping through the front door, Bai found his family. His father was in the living room, parked in front of the television. His mother was in the kitchen preparing food. His father noticed he was home early, but Bai didn't acknowledge him. His eyes went straight to his mother and stayed there. Just seeing her alive, it hit somewhere deep. It had been so long. As he crossed the room toward her, she communicated through sign language, her hands moving to tell him she had made his favorite spicy noodles. Bai told her he wanted fish instead. His mother pointed out the food was already ready and asked if the fish couldn't wait until tomorrow. He insisted, said he was really hungry. Without hesitation, she said she'd go out and get the fish. Bai immediately moved to go with her, but his father stepped in and said she could go alone. Then he turned on Bai, demanding to know what his problem was, walking into the house without even acknowledging him. He reminded Bai that today was supposed to be his awakening day and asked if there was any good news worth sharing. His father, himself an awakened, mentioned that he had even bought beer to celebrate with his son. Already had it chilling, ready to go. Bai told him he hadn't awakened yet, said there hadn't been enough time for all the students to get through the process. His father's expression soured immediately. He demanded to know why his son was home so early then. He went on saying that the son of someone mediocre had awakened a Firefly class and just like his father had turned out useless. But Bai was his son, and he should be awakening at minimum an Abyss class, just like he had back in his day. He reminded Bai that he worked hard to keep this family going and the least the boy could do in return was wake up something worth talking about. Then he asked again what was Bai's profession. Bai held the lie, said again that he hadn't awakened. That only made things worse. His father snapped and brought a beer bottle down on the boy's head. Using his powers, the father scanned his son's awakening and saw the truth. Bai had awakened a dust class, one of the absolute lowest tiers. Enraged, the old man demanded to know what his son had been doing at school to end up with something so pathetic. Bai thought to himself that his father had always been like this, volatile, unable to manage his own emotions. The first time around when Bai had awakened, his father had reacted the exact same way, exploding with rage over the low class and then taking out every ounce of that shame on his son. Bai's mother had tried to shield him, same as always, and ended up absorbing the full force of her husband's violence instead. She took everything he threw at her, and after that incident she was never quite the same again. Bai had carried that guilt for years, because that day there was nothing he could do to protect her, but now he had the chance to do it differently. The problem was, even though he wasn't the same helpless kid he'd been in his past life, Bai knew his father was a significantly stronger awakened. This wasn't going to be anything like putting a school bully in his place. The old man was already swinging, throwing punches and pouring venom with every hit. Through all of it, the only thing Bai could focus on was getting his mother out of that house as fast as possible. He managed it just barely. She was out, but almost immediately after, he saw something he had been dreading. His mother was coming back, walking straight through the door, right back into the middle of everything, exactly like the first time. Bai's mind raced. Why had she returned so soon? His father, at peak fury now, turned on his wife, blaming her directly for their son's weak awakening. And he showed no intention of stopping there. In his past life, Bai had never let go of what happened that day. Eventually, he had found a way to settle the score. But it had cost him his freedom. He'd been arrested, and yet he felt no remorse, not even a trace, because the old man had gotten exactly what he deserved. Back in the present, Bai moved to protect his mother, acting differently than he ever had before. But his father was still proving to be far beyond him in raw power. That's the reality of being awakened. Even without channeling their abilities, awakened individuals carry physical strength that completely surpasses an ordinary person's limits. A normal human being cannot simply withstand a punch from someone like that. Bai could absorb the blows, but his mother was throwing herself into the line of fire to protect him at every turn. And the old man had no intention of letting up. He ranted that he had been overjoyed learning he would have a son because he believed that son would finally bring real honor to the Bai family name. But now, he declared, the family's honor had always rested on him alone and him alone. In a rage, he demanded to know why his wife had to go and bring a good-for-nothing into this world. He swung a chair at her and missed, because Bai Yi activated his ability in time, throwing himself between them to take the hit. And then, he drew his sword and drove his father back with a direct strike. That made the old man pause, because now he could see clearly that the boy had been lying all along. He let out a short, cold laugh and told the kid he was finally starting to act like a man, but said he still had a long, long way to go before he could back that up. He went on the offensive and snapped the protagonist's sword clean in half, and then followed it up with a devastating blow. Bai Yi felt it everywhere. The gap between them was real. This wasn't a fight he could win right now. His whole body screamed at him. His father told him plainly that he didn't tolerate being challenged, and he had never once hesitated to use force to make that clear. Bai Yi stood his ground and didn't move out of the way. His father acknowledged the guts but called it pointless, because the kid was still weak and courage without power didn't change that. But Bai Yi had already decided he was not letting a single tragedy repeat itself in this life. Whatever came, he would endure it. His father kept going, venting every last drop of rage, reminding everyone in that room exactly who ran things in that house. And then a knock at the door, right at the peak of his fury. He snapped, demanding to know who was interrupting him. He swung the door open and stopped, because on the other side stood the vice captain of the inspection force and an allied investigator. Bai Yi's father demanded to know what they wanted. Liang explained that they had received a report of a dangerous fugitive spotted in the area and were going door to door until they located him. The old man claimed he hadn't seen anyone suspicious. Said he would have reported it himself if he had. But then the vice captain's eyes landed on Bai Yi, and he asked what had happened to the boy. The father quickly explained that his son had taken a fall on the way home, nothing to worry about. But then Bai Yi spoke up and told them exactly who had done it. His father couldn't believe the brat had actually said that, out loud, in front of law enforcement. What the father didn't know was that minutes before stepping back inside, Bai Yi had already made an anonymous call to report the situation. All he had needed to do was buy enough time for the authorities to arrive, and he had done exactly that. His father tried to keep his composure, but Bai Yi wasn't done. He described his father's actions in precise, damning detail and stated clearly that he was ready to testify and submit to a full physical examination. He also cited the relevant law, explicitly stating that the legislation concerning awakened individuals who fail to control their strength was very clear on this matter. The officers exchanged a look. They hadn't expected this level of clarity from a kid. The detail, the composure, the legal knowledge. Given the evidence in front of them, the vice captain gave the order the father was to be detained. The situation was clear-cut. His father lunged toward Bai Yi in a rage and was immediately restrained by both officers. As they dragged him out, he swore to Bai Yi that this wasn't over. And then Bai Yi's mother wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. He felt it, the relief of actually protecting her this time. But he already knew his father would only be held for a maximum of 15 days. He had to find a permanent solution, because the moment that man came back, everything would reset to exactly how it was. In the middle of the commotion, Bai Yi had quietly taken the opportunity to lift his father's key, a key that opened a hidden safe his father kept locked away from everyone. Because in his past life, his father had betrayed his own companions, and that safe was at the center of it all. It was what had allowed him to climb ranks and acquire a higher class. Bai Yi had only learned these details after his father's death. The man had taken every secret to the grave. But now he believed that getting his hands on whatever was in that safe would give him the edge he needed. With a dagger like the one stored inside, clearing demonic layers and leveling up fast suddenly became very possible. The only complication, all layers were under the control of the Divine Squad, which only accepted registered guild members. That said, there were smaller layers managed directly by Bai Yi's school, and he already knew about one of those hidden layers from his past life. He decided that had to be his next move, get stronger and get stronger fast. Meanwhile, over at the police station, the officers were disappointed that their lead on the criminal known as Snow had turned out to be a dead end. Regardless, the captain insisted they couldn't afford to let their guard down, because if Snow actually surfaced on the squad's anniversary, the fallout would be a full-blown scandal. At that point, Bai Yi's father was already in there trying to work an angle, telling the officers that if they let him walk, he could put in a word with a friend running the best maternity hospital in the region. Apparently, the captain's wife was pregnant. Liang wasn't moved, not even slightly. He noted that Mr. Bai had once been a guild member and seemed genuinely puzzled at how the man had ended up here. The investigator added that attempting to bribe a police officer would only make his situation significantly worse. That only made the father angrier, and every bit of that anger was directed straight at his son. Back to the protagonist, he had entered a lair. He figured that once it was eventually discovered, guilds would inevitably set up a garrison at the location. Demonic lairs, packed with beasts and demonic ores, were the single best environment for newly awakened individuals to grow quickly. The danger, though, meant novices always entered in teams, backed by a more experienced officer. In his past life, this particular lair stayed hidden for 5 full years, only discovered after things went badly wrong, when the accumulated monsters broke out and started flooding the surrounding area. A lair like this typically required at least 3 rank E awakened individuals to clear safely. A more dangerous lair would demand a 5-person team, with a minimum of 2 rank D awakened among them. Bai was hoping this one turned out to be rank F, because then he could clear it alone. He crossed the entrance, fully aware of what might be waiting inside, but the way he saw it, there was no alternative. He had to evolve and fast, because the real danger in his life wasn't in any dungeon. It was waiting for him back at home. Stepping inside, Bai immediately registered the temperature. This was a frigid dungeon, which meant only one thing: cloud-type demons. Moving deeper, he quickly realized he wasn't the first person to have found this place. He came across an iceberg-type demonic beast, currently in hibernation. The more he took in the surroundings, the more he understood this place was more dangerous than he had initially estimated. And as if to confirm it, one of the beasts detected his presence and moved in on him immediately. In that moment, he recognized that even a basic snow wolf outclassed him in raw power. But walking out without a fight wasn't an option, so he focused on reading the wolf's movements, dodging its attacks and waiting for an opening to counter. It worked. He landed the strike and claimed his first victory. Examining his father's hidden dagger afterward, he realized it was exactly what he needed to bridge the gap in his power. This wasn't something you could just buy off a market shelf. The problem, to advance to the next level, he'd need to take down around 20 wolves just like that one. And moving up a full rank would require 10 more levels on top of that. Then he saw them coming. The blood in the air had drawn the pack straight to him. But this was exactly the group he needed to hit his numbers, so he wasn't going anywhere. The protagonist found himself completely surrounded. Instead of retreating, he pushed forward and went on the offensive, using his agility to string together rapid dodges and near-instant counters. His speed was high enough that the wolves simply couldn't keep up. One by one, they went down, until only the Wolf King remained, who lasted about as long as the rest of them. With that, the protagonist jumped straight to rank D. But he felt it, a bone-deep exhaustion. His stamina wasn't what it used to be back in his prime. He also noted that a dimensional backpack would have been incredibly valuable right about now. Without one, he'd have to leave a lot of good loot sitting on the floor. The reality of demonic layers was that most of them were monopolized entirely by guild squads, which made evolving outside of them a serious uphill battle. For most awakened individuals, joining a squad wasn't ambition, it was survival. Schools for the awakened were managed by those same guild squads and functioned as one long, grueling selection process. Most students spent every day hoping to be picked, but getting expelled from a squad meant losing the ability to evolve, full stop. It was exactly what had happened to Bai's father, who had been locked at rank C ever since his expulsion. Bai noticed the cold was getting sharper and that he was burning through energy at an unsustainable rate. Time to pick up the pace. He used himself as bait and drew the wolves out of the cave. At the same time, he started felling the trees nearby, turning the environment itself into a weapon. But in executing that maneuver, he inadvertently pulled something much bigger out of the shadows. A group of cloud serpents materialized and moved to encircle him. But then, an explosion erupted directly in front of the monsters. Bai's instincts told him that with this much noise and chaos, the larger monster in this place had to have woken up. He was right, because moments later, the hibernating bear broke through, eyes open, fully awake, and standing directly in front of him. And it didn't stop there. The bear was enraged and it started tearing through everything in its path, including the other monsters sharing the dungeon with it. Bai immediately saw the opportunity and started banking points. Slipping in through the openings the bear was creating, he observed that as powerful as these beasts were, they weren't exactly strategic thinkers. The bear, in its fury, was doing a significant portion of the work for him. So Bai played it smart, hanging back and swooping in to deliver the finishing blows. Even with the bear doing the heavy lifting though, the whole ordeal was still draining him fast. He decided it was time to push the pace and force the endgame. All the destruction had the dungeon shaking around him, so he waited, letting as many monsters as possible pile into one spot, and then shattered the ice floor beneath them, looking at the layout with fresh eyes. Bai realized he had been standing on an ice bridge the whole time. Destroying it didn't just rack up eliminations, it also put a solid gap between him and whatever was still standing. Most of the monsters were down, one still remained, so he conserved what energy he had left, saving it for the final boss, because every layer has a boss waiting at the end, and this one was no different. The thing was, Bai already knew that in this dungeon. There was a monster that made the bear look tame by comparison. He figured though, that something that dangerous should have already shown itself with this much chaos going on. Either way, the bear was the immediate problem, but before he could make a move, Bai spotted more ice closing in, and he understood immediately he hadn't been wrong. The monster hadn't been hibernating at all, it had been waiting, patiently, for exactly the right moment. It flash froze the bear and snapped the trap shut around the protagonist. The moment Bai realized what had happened, he bolted. But his foot was already frozen solid, he wasn't going anywhere. And with the bridge destroyed, there was no way across. He had walked right into a perfectly laid trap. A low-level layer, and somehow it was home to a boss with actual tactical intelligence. Then he saw them, the demonic sorcerer and his minions. The snow monkeys, nobody was expecting this, Bai definitely wasn't. And just like that, escaping this had gone from difficult to nearly impossible. Surrounded by the demonic wizard and his entire crew, the protagonist was in a genuinely critical situation. Frozen in place, Bai couldn't move and his body was hemorrhaging energy by the second. The wizard gave the order and one of the monkeys moved in to strike. Bai stayed completely still, there wasn't much he could do, the monkey hit. But Bai had been counting on exactly that. The force of the blow shattered the ice holding him in place. He used his powers to absorb the damage, but he still came out of it wounded. Running on less than full energy made that unavoidable. Still, Bai clocked something, it would take the wizard some time before he could fire off another powerful spell. That window was the only one he had. He needed to take the wizard down before it closed. But then the situation got worse, a bear appeared and joined the fight if it was already bad before. With reinforcements in the mix, the enemy had just become significantly more dangerous. And Bai's stamina was nearly gone, every factor was stacking against him. His odds of winning were shrinking fast, but even so, he kept going. He could feel himself running out of runway though. His strength was draining with every passing second. He dodged what he could, but the environment itself was working against him. The cold was relentless. And just maintaining his body temperature was eating through his reserves. And then to top it off, the wizard launched an ice storm directly at him. Bai noted grimly that the wizard's cooldown was cycling faster than he had expected. But Bai had survived things far worse than this over 10 years of frontline combat. And those repeated near-death experiences had sharpened something in him, the ability to read a situation and find the opening others would miss. Right now, as he assessed his position, he saw two options. Stay and fight until his body gave out entirely, which wasn't viable, because the odds of surviving that were basically zero, or get out while he still physically could. He made his choice and sprinted for the abyss. Before he reached the edge, the ice caught him, freezing him mid-stride. Even the wizard seemed caught off guard watching him go over. But this was calculated. Bai's plan was to use the ice itself to absorb and cushion the impact of the fall. And with that, he dropped straight to the bottom of the abyss. Meanwhile, back at home, his mother had assumed he was sleeping in. But when she went to check, his bed was empty. He had left a note saying he'd gone to a friend's place. His mother, who knew him better than anyone, wasn't buying it. If that were actually true, Bai would have just told her directly. He wouldn't have needed to leave a note. And now that she thought about it, ever since he had come home the day before, something about him felt completely different. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened to her son. Back to the protagonist. He worked out that when the ice bridge had collapsed, nearly 100 demonic beasts had gone down with it. At that point in the fall, he had only leveled up 3 times, which meant roughly half of those beasts had died on impact, while the other half had survived the fall and were still very much alive. He had been gambling on there being a river at the bottom of the cliff, a calculated risk. So he jumped, he survived, but the landing still did damage, and he was starting to think he might have genuinely hit his limit, teetering right on the edge of being finished. And of course, because the universe has terrible timing, Lord Glacial, a saber-toothed tiger, found him in that exact moment. Bai's mind drifted back to the moments of camaraderie with his squad, the laughs, the battles, the bonds. All of it left behind the moment he returned to the past and started over from nothing. The one thing this second chance had given him that mattered was seeing his mother again, but that fragile reality was dangerously close to collapsing. If he died here, his father would eventually come home and his mother would have nobody standing between them. And his revenge against the traitor who wiped out his entire team, that would die here with him. He refused. He was not going out like this. He had to act, even if it meant reaching past his own limits to do it. With everything he had left, he grabbed one of the tiger's fangs and swore to himself that history would not repeat itself. Not again. Bai pulled every last drop of strength he had left, focused it into a single, precise strike and brought the tiger down. He got back on his feet. But this was the tiger's den, and the rest of the pack emerged almost immediately, locking in. But Bai knew something that most people forget: it's in moments of absolute life or death pressure that class advancements can trigger. What didn't kill him was, in fact, making him stronger. Literally. Even surrounded by powerful enemies on all sides, the adrenaline hit like a second wind. The bonus he'd gained wasn't quite enough to push him to the next level, but in exchange, something new had unlocked, a new ability. Time to find out what it could do. Because the first test subject was standing right in front of him, Bai didn't hesitate. He activated the move called Sanctuary. Every creature in range felt the pressure of his strength descend on them at once. With a single sweeping attack, multiple monsters dropped simultaneously, and his attributes climbed with each one. By the end of it, he felt genuinely ready to head back up and close out the dungeon. The remaining monsters were significantly weaker now. Bai was sitting at rank 8 and even the brutal cold had stopped bothering him. Sanctuary absorbed every incoming attack from his enemies and sent all of it straight back at them. The catch being that it couldn't be used on infinite cooldown. But even so, Bai's stamina had recovered enough to work with. He paused and realized he genuinely wasn't sure how long he'd been down here, and figured it was probably time to wrap this up and get back home. Up at the top of the dungeon, the boss had been sitting comfortably in his cabin with his allies, using it as a refuge. That comfort was about to be very rudely interrupted, because Bai walked in and made it clear he was there to finish what he started. Back at Bai's house, his mother was pacing, worried, not knowing where he had gone and terrified that something had gone horribly wrong. Meanwhile, Bai had already breached the boss's cabin. He launched the bear directly into the structure, bringing a significant portion of it down with the impact. Coming face to face with the boss again, Bai wasted zero time making clear that this encounter was going to go very differently. The enemy, unbothered, simply ordered his servants to swarm Bai. But this time around, Bai was visibly on a different level. He wasn't just holding his ground, he was dismantling the enemies with a clean, controlled efficiency. Annoyed, the sorcerer opened with an ice storm, but unlike the first encounter, Bai walked straight through it, completely immune, didn't even slow down. Realizing his signature move had zero effect, the sorcerer pivoted, summoning another wave of monkey minions. But Bai had already committed to ending this fight. Knowing that this victory would push him to rank D, he dialed up the aggression and landed a precise hit directly on the hand the enemy used to cast his spells, shutting down the mage's ability to conjure anything else. With the mage fully exposed and defenseless, Bai moved in and finished it. The experience flooded in and he advanced to rank D. On top of that, he noticed he had built up enough cloud elemental energy to trigger a bonus, which meant he had just unlocked a new red class profession, one he could switch to freely at any time. The monsters had also dropped solid loot, and his inventory capacity had expanded along with it. Even with the boss cleared, Bai decided he wasn't leaving until every last monster in the dungeon was dealt with. He took the opportunity to run his new ability through its paces before finally heading for the exit. Sometime later, Bai's mother was still at home, quietly spiraling with worry. Until she heard the door, she had been half convinced something terrible had happened. But Bai walked in, apologized for being gone so long, and showed her he was in one piece. She immediately pulled him into a hug, holding on like she needed to confirm it for herself. Once she let go, Bai told her he had something to say and asked her to hear him out. He sat down with his mother and proposed they move somewhere better. He had collected valuable items inside the dungeon and already knew he could turn them into a solid amount of money. Bai brought one of the stones to a buyer. The buyer examined it with interest but pushed back on the asking price, arguing that a stone of that type simply wasn't worth that much. After some back and forth, they landed on a number they could both live with. With that money in hand, Bai figured he could finally secure a place actually worth living in. He thought back to his past life. His mother had never known a single day of real peace. That wasn't happening again. This time he was going to give her every comfort he possibly could. He locked down a solid rental agreement, a decent place, finally somewhere they could breathe. Watching his mother's face light up, he realized just how long it had been since he'd last seen her smile like that. With the housing situation handled, Bai shifted his focus back to what mattered next, getting stronger. His father was behind bars, but that didn't mean the threat was gone, not even close. He needed to deal with that problem before anything else. In the meantime, he got to work crafting a bracelet using a magical stone, something he believed would help him carry out what he had set out to do. Somewhere far from there, a group of adventurers pushed into a dungeon. One of the members was already hyping up the leader, praising his performance. The leader's sister offered him water and suggested they take a break. He turned it down, said they needed to get to the demonic lair and train while the window was still open. This was Ding Ding, the leader, and in his mind, nobody in the simulated combat test was coming close to him. He genuinely believed he was in a league of his own. Meanwhile, somewhere else entirely, a woman was working through the list of newly awakened novices. Not a single gold-level class among them that year, which meant one thing. The simulation was going to be completely uneventful, nothing worth getting excited about. Back to Bai Yi's, he woke up in the new apartment and found breakfast already waiting for him, prepared by his mother. He asked her why she hadn't woken him up. She told him she hadn't had the heart to. He had looked so exhausted that she couldn't bring herself to do it. She added that sleeping in and eating a proper meal every now and then wasn't going to hurt anyone. And honestly, Bai Yi had to admit she was right. It had been a long time since he'd slept or eaten that well. His mother then asked if he needed any new books or toys. Bai Yi looked at her a little puzzled. Why was she suddenly trying to give him a gift out of nowhere? She smiled and reminded him that his birthday was coming up. That hit him. He had completely forgotten. It had been so long since he'd actually celebrated it that the date had just slipped away from him. He sat with it while he ate, turning the thought over in his head. But in the end, he decided he didn't need anything. He already had what mattered. The only thing he was truly after was the revenge he'd been carrying since the moment he woke up in the past. After the weekend, everyone was back at school. The teacher announced it was time to start preparing for the simulated combat. He added that since the school operated under the Divine Guild, they would be under observation throughout the process. The simulated combat was the first major showcase after awakening, the final assessment of elementary school, and it was going to be broadcast live. On top of that, whoever stood out would earn a spot on the training journey alongside advanced high school students. And that journey, it was the fastest route to getting close to the Divine Guild. The school gathered the best students from both elementary and high school and sent them to the sacred country where the Divine Guild's headquarters actually were. Hearing that, Bai Yi felt something stir. That place was where he had once met his old master, but it was also where the traitor had come from. They hadn't known each other back then though. The traitor had joined the squad much later down the line. Still, Bai Yi understood clearly what this meant. If he wanted any shot at crossing paths with the people he needed to find, he had to dominate this assessment and earn his place on that training journey. Bai Yi might have been the only one fueled by revenge, but he was far from the only one hungry for first place. Sensing the energy in the room, the teacher called it the test was starting. He explained that the first stage would be physical conditioning. Students were to enter the gravity room and complete 10 sets of zigzag runs. While everyone else rushed to be first through the door, Bai Yi made a different call entirely. He told the teacher he'd rather not use that room. The professor blinked. That wasn't a request he got every day. He acknowledged Bai Yi's talent but made clear it wasn't a free pass from the evaluation. Bai Yi clarified he wasn't trying to skip anything. He was asking for a different kind of evaluation. The professor raised an eyebrow and asked if Bai Yi was implying there was something wrong with his teaching method. Bai Yi didn't back down. He argued that physical conditioning mattered, but its value was limited depending on your class. Mages and sorcerers, for instance, would benefit far more from time in an elemental room. Each class had specific needs, and a one-size-fits-all approach left a lot on the table. Hearing that, Kai Yin's eyes widened slightly because the method Bai Yi had just described was identical to what instructor Dong Yang from the Divine Squad had been recommending, and that was very recent information. Information she only knew about through her father. So how exactly did her classmate know any of this? Despite what the other students were expecting to happen, the professor wasn't even slightly annoyed. If anything, he found the suggestion genuinely interesting. He explained, however, that with so many students under his care, adapting individual training on this kind of timeline was no small thing. For a teacher, the choice between guiding a student's development or stepping back and letting them follow their own instincts was always a difficult one. Bai Yi reflected quietly that in his past life, he had been fortunate enough to find teachers worth trusting. Without them, he never would have climbed the ranks he did. He had trusted his masters then, and now he was asking the professor to extend that same trust to him. The professor considered it and agreed, but he wanted to know what Bai Yi actually had in mind. Bai Yi told him he wanted the elemental room set to maximum pressure. He kept the real reason to himself, of course. He explained that even as a warrior, he wanted to balance his overall skill set and address his weaknesses. At that point, Kai Yin spoke up. She was a mage and she also wanted to use the elemental room. She asked if she could train alongside Bai Yi. He said no. She took the rejection in stride and announced she'd use it as motivation instead. She'd prove her worth and eventually she'd earn his trust. As Bai Yi and Kai Yin made their way to the elemental room, the nerdy classmate watched them go and quietly accepted that he was going to have to work a whole lot harder to even think about reaching their level. Inside the elemental room, Bai Yi was finally alone, and that was exactly the point. This was where he could build new skills without anyone watching too closely. Because everything in there was being monitored, and only in a space like that could he develop abilities from other classes without triggering suspicion. Showing his hand anywhere else would put a target on his back immediately. As for his classmates, Bai Yi had already decided it was better to keep his distance. After class, he tried to slip away and head home on his own, but his classmates caught up to him before he could. He thought about it. In his past life, the three of them had been inseparable, the school outcasts who always walked home together. But this time around, his mind was somewhere else entirely. Revenge had taken up every corner of it, and friendships felt like a liability he couldn't afford. His nerdy classmate had already started picking up on the shift. Ever since the awakening exam, Bai Yi had been different. Pulling away, not interested in hanging out anymore. Still, Bai Yi paused, turned to the nerd and told him to get his lungs checked as soon as possible. Then he hopped on his bicycle and rode off, leaving both of them standing there, completely confused. In his past life, that classmate had been diagnosed with a lung disease, one that was caught too late and took his life far too early. The nerd stood there for a moment, processing it. Bai Yi had clearly changed, but there was still something in him that looked out for people. You could feel it. The scene shifts to the sacred realm, specifically a novice training ground. One of the veterans mentions offhand that he's been hearing about a new recruit from the Divine Squad putting up some remarkable numbers. He turns to the recruit directly and asks if it's true. Did this kid really break every record on the board? The recruit, who is, in fact, the protagonist's future enemy, responds modestly that Lord Dingyang is exaggerating. He says he's only there to formally introduce himself. Cutting back to Bai Yi's, he tells his mother not to go out at night anymore. From now on, he'd handle the shopping on his way home. She didn't need to worry about it. He was thinking clearly. He needed to get her into a safe, stable situation as fast as possible because he already knew what was coming. Meanwhile, inside the prison where Bai Yi's father was being held, the man had already been working on a plan with the canteen leader. He'd paid for leverage and quietly negotiated a way out. The next day, Bai Yi was back at school, steadily progressing in his mage class, already able to manipulate elemental force and bend it to his advantage. His friends tried to pull him back into their orbit. Bai Yi kept his wall up. He told them plainly, instead of wasting time on him, they should be using it to get stronger. They chose to hear it as encouragement, and the nerdy classmate actually took it to heart. He went straight to the school infirmary. The doctor didn't take long to find it. The lung disease was right there. He immediately advised the boy to schedule surgery as soon as possible. The nerd sat with that for a moment. How had Bai Yi known? He himself had had no idea anything was wrong. If it weren't for Bai Yi, he might not have found out until it was too late. On his way out, walking through the school corridors, the nerd caught a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. Some students were talking about Hong Changsheng. Apparently he'd cheated again. already climbed to rank 4 and taken first place in the evaluation. Of course he had. The guy had access to a private dungeon. They also brought up the kid who had stood up to Changsheng recently. Apparently, Changsheng had been stewing over it and was now planning revenge, an ambush. And since a spoiled kid like that wasn't going to let public humiliation slide, he decided to carry it out off school grounds, specifically to avoid any punishment. The nerd didn't hesitate. He ran to find Bai Yi. He knew that outside of school there was nothing stopping anyone from interfering with a revenge plot. Even if Bai Yi was strong, getting caught completely off guard was a real possibility. And even though conflict was the last thing this kid ever wanted to walk into, this time he refused to be a coward. He went to the school armory and broke the lock on the chains. If his skills weren't enough to protect a friend, maybe a magical weapon would close the gap. He was fully prepared to face whatever consequences came with it. What he wasn't prepared for was getting caught on the spot. Kai Yin appeared out of nowhere and asked him exactly where he thought he was going with a stolen weapon. He told her he needed to save Bai Yi. Kai Yin stared at him, genuinely thrown by what she was hearing. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already on his way home, cutting through an alley on his bicycle. He'd clocked the tail ever since leaving school, and without even looking back, he told Hong Changsheng to stop hiding. And out stepped Hong Changsheng, declaring that today was the day he settled everything from last week. Bai Yi asked him, completely calm, whether he was really that confident the outcome would be different. Hong Changsheng said yes and launched his attack immediately, insisting that no amount of training was going to save the protagonist from what was coming. Hong Changsheng was certain of the result. And then Bai Yi blocked it effortlessly. The bully couldn't process it. Getting beaten by Bai Yi once was already something he hadn't been able to accept. A second time was simply not supposed to happen. Bai Yi told him plainly he hadn't been the only one getting stronger. There was something Hong Changsheng had failed to notice the first time they fought. But standing here now, it finally clicked for Hong Changsheng. Bai Yi was operating on a completely different level, one that Changsheng was never going to reach at this rate. Still reeling, Hong Changsheng demanded to know how Bai Yi had leveled up so fast. He himself had been grinding relentlessly outside of school, giving it everything he had, and his results had barely met expectations. So how was a kid without the same resources or connections pulling ahead of him? Bai Yi's response was sharp. He told the spoiled boy that he had no idea what real effort looked like. Then he asked him something that cut right through the posturing. Had he ever actually died? Hong Changsheng flinched and asked if Bai Yi was planning to eliminate him right there. Bai Yi told him no, he didn't hate the guy, just didn't appreciate being hunted. He also pointed out that instead of setting up a halfway decent ambush, Changsheng had decided to come alone and wing it, apparently convinced that would be enough. Annoyed, Hong Changsheng fired back that if Bai Yi wasn't going to finish this now, then it wasn't over and they'd be seeing each other again soon. Right at that moment, Bai Yi's classmates arrived on the scene. Only to find that Hong Changsheng was already on the losing end again. Bai Yi turned to his opponent and said he had a proposal. He could show Changsheng a path to actually getting stronger and faster, but it would cost him something in return. Sometime later, back at school, the teacher wrapped up the training week and announced that the combat simulation was about to begin. Before that, though, he had something important to say. Despite the name, the location they were heading to was a real demonic lair. Much of the danger had been sealed off with barriers, but that didn't make it a field trip. The creatures inside were real and students needed to treat them accordingly. Senior high school students would be accompanying the novices. But they'd only step in if absolutely necessary. The priority was everyone making it out safely. Teams would be 4 to 5 students, each led into a dungeon by a veteran. Each team could choose between a rank F or rank E demonic layer. But anyone who wasn't ready for the harder challenge needed to be honest about that, because failing the mission meant losing credits, not just bragging rights. The teacher opened it up and asked anyone confident enough to take on the rank E layer to raise their hand. Kai Yin's hand went up first. Hong Changsheng's followed almost immediately after. The teacher noted the count. Out of 180 students, only 8 had gone for the rank E challenge. Everyone else was being distributed among the rank F layers. And then the protagonist raised his hand and declared he wanted to challenge a rank D, specifically the spiritual Jade demonic layer. Dead silence. Every single person in that room, students and professor alike, just stared. The professor was the first to recover. Bai Yi didn't blink. He pointed out that the school's rules contained no explicit prohibition against it. Every student had the freedom to choose the rank they wished to face. He went further, reminding the director that this institution existed to identify exceptional talent for the Divine Guild: courage, strength, responsibility, and natural ability. He looked Hong Liang in the eye and asked whether the director was genuinely going to take away his chance to prove himself. Hong Liang felt the corner closing in but pushed back on one thing: entering the lair required a team. Bai Yi responded that he could manage alone. The director held firm: the rules required a team for the students' own safety. That part wasn't up for debate. Then Kaiyin spoke up. She said she would go with Bai Yi. The director hesitated. Her father wouldn't approve of this. Kaiyin made clear she had no intention of being left behind. She wanted the highest score just as much as anyone, and this was her shot. Bai Yi, for his part, refused the help. He'd rather do it alone. But the professor shut that down. Refusing wasn't on the table. If Bai Yi wanted the rank D layer, he was going in as part of a team. Non-negotiable. The only problem now was finding a veteran willing to go with them. The professor wasn't sure who to send until a student spoke up and volunteered, saying someone had to do it. The professor introduced the student, acknowledging his role as the team's support, and asked him to keep an eye on the younger ones. Kai Yin mentioned quietly that this veteran had nearly made it into the school's guild. Bai Yi, meanwhile, was drawing a blank. He had no memory of this person at all. Ziling, on the other hand, had already sized Bai Yi up and written him off: just some kid trying to look impressive in front of an audience. He had no idea what he was actually walking into. Either way, the professor declared the team was set and they could move forward with the test. He added that camera drones would accompany them inside the lair to broadcast everything live. As a professor, keeping his students motivated was part of the job, and he made no effort to hide how eager he was to see who came out on top this year. Bai Yi already knew the full picture. The Awakened School had been constructed on top of an ancient, sprawling demonic lair that had been conquered long ago. The middle and high school sections occupied the same complex, and from that main layer, countless smaller ones had branched off over time, perfect environments for combat testing. Most of those secondary layers ran between rank F and rank D the moment a student crossed into the instance. The combat simulation was officially live, and everything happening inside was being broadcast in real time, every second recorded, which meant Bai Yi had to be careful. He couldn't afford to put his full hand on the table in front of an audience he didn't trust. But regardless of that concern, the spiritual Jade Demon Lair was his primary target. That was the mission. Once inside, Ziling immediately announced he'd be handling the protection, said he'd been in places like this before and knew what he was doing. Kai Yin asked if the monsters in there were really as strong as rumored. Ziling confirmed it, but noted that the school had sealed off the most dangerous ones. The chances of something truly terrifying like a boss actually showing up were slim. That said, he warned Kai Yin not to get comfortable. The monsters that remained were still nothing to dismiss. As the veteran, it was his duty to protect the novices, and he'd make sure they walked out of there with some student credits to show for it. Then he noticed something. The protagonist had already moved ahead. Alone, without waiting for anyone, Ziling called after him, warning that moving like that would draw monsters straight to him. Bai Yi didn't even slow down. He said he was done listening, that he didn't need the help, and told Ziling to stay out of his way. Ziling stood there genuinely at a loss for words. The audacity, not that it mattered because everything happening in that dungeon was going out live. Every student and teacher at the school could pull up the feed and watch in real time. Over at the school guild, the vice leader had his eyes on the broadcast already, and he'd found something that caught his attention. He told his boss there was a freshman this year who had deliberately requested a rank D layer. His boss asked what class the kid was running. The vice leader replied, Green Warrior class, widely considered the most useless class in the game, and yet the vice leader said he wanted to keep watching. He had to understand where that confidence was coming from. Elsewhere, one of the students in a different dungeon was barely holding it together, and he was in the rank F dungeon, the weakest one available. His teammate reminded him that as a caster, his job was to stay in the back and provide support. There was no reason to be this wound up. The student asked how in the world an F-rank dungeon, the supposedly weakest option, could feel this terrifying. Little did he know that the students in the rank E dungeon were dealing with something far worse. That group had already walked into an ambush and a healer was busy keeping them upright. In that chaos, Hong Changsheng made his declaration he'd fight alone if he had to. His target was clear, he wasn't going to let his rival outshine him. Meanwhile, inside the rank D dungeon, the protagonist was already working through the monsters, taking them down one by one. Kai Yin watched, visibly impressed. And as his teammate, she had to ask, how was he doing all of that by himself? Bai Yi explained that the monsters in there were sealed and operating at roughly half their actual strength, so they weren't as threatening as they looked on paper. Kai Yin absorbed that, genuinely grateful for the explanation, but she also admitted that even pushing her absolute best, she was nowhere near his level yet. Bai Yi told her to stop measuring herself against others and focus on her own growth. That was the only path forward that actually worked. Kai Yin heard that and took it as fuel. She promised herself she'd close that gap one day. Zealing, watching all of this, wanted no part of the admiration. He couldn't stand the arrogance. He reminded the protagonist that this was a rank D dungeon and that overconfidence got people killed, and offered to share some tips from a senior who actually knew what he was doing. Bai Yi ignored him completely and instead turned to Kai Yin, telling her to cover the monsters on the right while he handled the left. Then he moved on, leaving Zealing talking to empty air. He headed toward his objective without a backward glance. Before splitting, Bai Yi told Kai Yin that the monsters on the right seemed like the weaker cluster. He asked if she could handle them solo and explained that the whole point of this simulation was to test individual capability. If she wanted a real grade, she had to start showing what she could actually do. Kai Yin understood and said she'd give it everything she had. While the two sorted themselves out, Zealing was practically fuming. In his mind, this arrogant kid was making everything more complicated than it needed to be. The protagonist's performance was already drawing eyes from far outside the dungeon. Back at school, the teachers could barely keep tabs on the other teams, because everyone was glued to Bai Yi's feed. By this point, it was common knowledge that Bai Yi himself had pushed to enter a rank D layer. The observers noted that his decision to send Kai Yin to the opposite side wasn't random. She was a flower type, which made her naturally effective against monsters of the same category. Bai Yi's own teacher watched and understood. This wasn't showing off. The kid knew exactly what he was doing, and every move he made backed that up. What he had noticed earlier was that star-type monsters were coming out of the cave on the right. Low-level and specifically weak against the flower element, which happened to be the class representative's specialty. Knowing that, he had let Kai Yin take that side, confident she could hold her own against those particular enemies. And in that sense, he wasn't wrong. As a mage, Kai Yin had exactly the right toolkit for what she was facing. She worked through them with relative efficiency. Bai Yi also knew that at rank E, mages unlock a basic skill specific to their class. Kai Yin's allowed her to weaponize plants, building a poisonous barrier to lock down enemies. For her first time inside an actual dungeon, though, facing higher-level monsters alone and staying composed throughout, that was genuinely impressive. Bai Yi figured the rank D monsters should all be accounted for by the seals, which meant letting Kai Yin hold the rear was a reasonable call. That way, he could push for the highest score without broadcasting everything he was truly capable of on a live feed. The problem was that the transmission equipment wasn't going to make that easy if it kept tailing him. While Bai Yi was working through his options, Zealing was stewing in his corner, rage quietly building. Being ignored didn't sit well with him at all, and now he was looking for a way to make things difficult for the protagonist. That's when he fired an arrow in Kai Yin's direction. It didn't hit her, it sailed right past and disappeared into a cave. Kai Yin immediately asked what that was about. Zealing claimed he was trying to grant her a buff and that she'd simply moved out of the way. It was a lie and not a very convincing one because that arrow had just done exactly what Zealing intended. It woke something up inside that cave. A two-headed lion far stronger than anything else currently in that dungeon, and it was furious. Bai Yi clocked the situation instantly. His teammate was in serious trouble. Kai Yin threw her magic at the creature, trying to contain it, but it wasn't enough. The monster blew right through her efforts and she was left completely exposed. Zealing watched from a distance, satisfied with the chaos he had just engineered. Meanwhile, Bai Yi was already moving to cover Kai Yin. The creature wasn't sealed, he could see that immediately, so he stepped in before the situation turned irreversible. He landed a hit on the monster but couldn't finish it. The thing was faster than he had clocked it for, from his position. Zealing reflected on what he knew. He'd studied this dungeon thoroughly. He knew exactly where that two-headed lion had been dormant and precisely how dangerous it was. That's why he hadn't hesitated to use it to blow up the protagonist's run. And he had even amplified the creature using his own ability, which explained why the numbers weren't adding up. Bai Yi assessed the situation. He was starting to think he might have to drop the mask and go full power. He ordered Kai Yin to fall back. She wouldn't be able to contribute meaningfully right now. The monster didn't give them a moment to breathe and came in hard, but Kai Yin didn't retreat. She raised her hands and pushed forward with her magic. She conjured magical roots to bind the creature, then built a wall of vines 3 layers thick. Even Bai Yi hadn't seen that coming. She looked at him and said that even if he didn't think it was the right call, she could help him bring it down. He was staying in this fight. Ziling watched from the sidelines, genuinely puzzled. She had nearly been swallowed whole just seconds ago. What was driving her to push forward anyway? Even the protagonist admitted he had expected her to lock up. Fear was the natural response, but the girl had more emotional backbone than she let on. Kai Yin made it clear she had worked too hard to get to this point and she wasn't folding now. She added that as long as Bai Yi was there with her, she wasn't going to die. Bai Yi acknowledged it and warned her that the 3-layer vine wall was useful but had its limits. She shouldn't push it past what it could handle. He thought back to who Kai Yin had been in his past life. Brilliant from the very start, always optimistic, always steady and generous to a fault. She came from a powerful family but never let that define how she treated people, which was exactly why her class had voted her representative without hesitation. After that period, Bai Yi had lost track of her and assumed she'd settled into a quiet life somewhere. But watching her now, he thought that maybe he could trust this version of her. And if nothing went sideways, he might be able to close out this situation without fully revealing what he was capable of. Ziling, observing from the side, doubted these two could actually pull it off. Confidence alone didn't win fights. With power levels this limited, there was no realistic scenario where a pair of novices took down a creature like that. He figured it was only a matter of time before they were begging for his help. The monster tore through the roots. Bai Yi called out the plan. He'd draw its attention, and Kai Yin needed to hit the lion at the right moment. Aiming directly for its core, he broke into motion. He calculated that since he'd already wounded it, the creature would lock onto him as the primary threat. Banking on that, Bai Yi sprinted for the lake and dove straight into the water without slowing down. He went deep. The monster followed. Right where he wanted it, the moment he gave the signal, Kai Yin released the vines. They wrapped around the creature and locked it in place. Trapped with nowhere to go, the lion descended into desperation, with Kai Yin's vines. Holding firm, the lion was completely immobilized. She added poison on top of it to accelerate the damage. Bai Yi confirmed what he already suspected. The lion wasn't breaking free from that. He said it clearly. This was the moment to finish the test with a perfect score. Ziling's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe what he was looking at. Because even he, with all his experience as a veteran, wouldn't have been able to pin down a creature of that magnitude. With his plan completely dismantled, Ziling swallowed his frustration and accepted that there was nothing left to do. In the broadcast booth, the director was watching the feed alongside the other staff members. Bai Yi's professor couldn't stop talking about his students' reaction time and natural leadership instincts. As far as he was concerned, the top score wasn't even a question. He and the others started speculating that if the full recording went to the guild for review, they might actually be looking at a historical score record. Right in the middle of that anticipation, though, the feed cut out. Ziling had deliberately knocked the drone out of the air. No recording, no score, simple as that. He assumed the protagonist hadn't noticed. He'd seen him deep in conversation with his teammate when it happened. Figured he'd gotten away with it clean. Ziling walked over and announced that they were done. Time to leave the dungeon. He personally couldn't stand being in there a second longer. Bai Yi didn't buy it for a moment. He told the veteran he knew exactly what that arrow had been for. Ziling held the excuse, said it was just a buff attempt and she dodged. Bai Yi came right back. As a veteran archer, Ziling was going to need a much more convincing story than that. Kai Yin nodded. It made complete sense now, and it also explained why Ziling had never made it into the school guild. Ziling snapped and demanded to know if he was being formally accused of something. Bai Yi stepped forward and put himself between Ziling and his teammate. Even in his irritation, Ziling knew better than to try anything rash. He settled for a promise instead. This wasn't over and they'd be seeing each other again. On the way out of the dungeon, the protagonist spotted the destroyed drone on the ground. Kai Yin began connecting the dots. The veteran had been there purely to sabotage them. But instead of being upset, Bai Yi saw exactly what this was. An opening. With the cameras gone, he could finally do what he hadn't been able to do with everyone watching. His teammate asked what he meant by that. Instead of explaining, he turned around and led her back to the previous portal. He asked the class representative to keep what was about to happen between them, though privately he figured even if she talked, nobody would believe her anyway. Kai Yin stared at him, completely lost. The answer lay in his last meeting with Hong Changsheng. The protagonist had asked for something specific. The demonic stone, the one item capable of breaking the seals that Changsheng's uncle had placed on the dungeon. Now that he had it, every piece was in position, and he was about to undo the dungeon's seal entirely. Kai Yin immediately said that was a terrible idea. A rank D dungeon breaking the seal meant every high-level beast inside would be unleashed all at once. Bai Yi knew that. He was counting on exactly that. He reassured her anyway, even with the seal broken. The creatures would still be running at reduced power. Kai Yin wasn't convinced. Just the two of them against a wave like that was suicide. Bai Yi told her he'd be handling it alone. That's when Kai Yin noticed something that stopped her cold. The protagonist had just switched to the mage class right in front of her eyes. She demanded to know how he had done that. Bai Yi asked Kai Yin to wait outside. Then he dropped the barrier. The monsters poured out. Bai Yi stood there facing them. Kai Yin watched from outside, holding her breath. But the protagonist was operating on a completely different level from what she'd seen before. He activated his primary ability, and the enemies froze in place. Every one of them locked down instantly. Kai Yin stood there with her mouth open. This was a completely different scale from what she'd managed against a single lion. She had pushed everything she had just to take down one, and her colleague had just frozen an entire wave of them simultaneously without breaking a sweat. Bai Yi explained almost casually that these monsters had been sealed for so long that they were practically bursting at the seams with pent-up energy. He said he needed more room to work. Kai Yin backed up immediately, giving him the space. A short time later, another wave came through, wild flame leopards this time. Bai Yi clocked them immediately, rank D, but the extended period of being sealed had cut their actual strength significantly. He used the freezing ability again to lock them in place. Then, the moment he spotted the next threat closing in, he dropped out of mage class and snapped into warrior mode. Magic wasn't the right tool for what was coming. This one required getting hands-on. Bai Yi expected the enemies to try catching him off guard, but the monsters weren't nearly as tactical as he was. The moment the opening appeared, he switched back to mage mode and froze the leopard clean. Kai Yin had been watching the whole thing in complete disbelief. The class switching alone was mind-bending enough. But the speed of it, now she understood why he had wanted the elemental room all to himself. The foundation of the mage class is releasing energy as natural forces or controlling objects tied to the same element, which made the elemental room the perfect training ground. Kai Yin had always assumed that the key was having more mana. More casts per fight meant more damage, more options, but watching Bai Yi work, she understood the real answer wasn't volume, it was control. Elemental power sourced from nature is raw and wild, inherently difficult to shape precisely. True mastery of your element means you can create entirely different movements from a single basic ability. The variety he was pulling out of one skill was something she had never seen before. And beyond the mage class, she realized that unlike her, he had complete, total command over everything he was using. Kai Yin accepted it honestly. He had surpassed everyone else a long time ago. And rather than frustration, what she felt looking at him now was something closer to genuine awe. Then an even larger presence made itself known. A level 15 infernal mammoth emerged from the depths. The protagonist didn't flinch. He had already anticipated something like this would show up. He shifted to warrior class and prepared for the engagement. He suspected that what he was really looking for would be on that mammoth, and with that, he drove a strike into the mammoth's head. His read was that after being sealed for so long, the mammoth would be running well below its peak, which explained why the opening had come as cleanly as it did. That said, something with that much mass and power was not going down from a single hit. So the protagonist kept going, methodically dismantling it until it had nothing left. In the middle of the fight, he called up an ability, Sanctuary. With it active, every strike carried significantly more force behind it. And the effect didn't stop at the mammoth. The remaining enemies in the area went down with it. The victory rewards rolled in all at once. But the real prize wasn't the experience or the points, it was what the mammoth dropped. The King's Reply Stone. A matched pair of jade stones with a very specific and very valuable function. And beyond the item itself, his mage class advanced to rank D, but with that done, a different kind of challenge was waiting for him. His teammate was still standing there in a state of complete shock. Bai Yi walked over and asked if she remembered what they had agreed to. Kai Yin, still visibly dazed, had no bad intentions about any of it, and she had leveled up just from being part of his team, so she couldn't exactly complain. Outside the dungeon, the teachers were starting to panic. The camera feed tracking the most critical students had gone dark, and they were now operating under the assumption that the dungeon seal had broken. One of the teachers located the veteran who was supposed to be accompanying the novices and found him standing outside alone. Immediately asked what he was doing there. But there was no time to dig into it. If the seal had actually broken, every available person needed to get into that dungeon right now. Zeeling watched the scramble with barely concealed satisfaction. In his mind, if the seal had broken, that arrogant kid was finished. The teachers and students rushed into the dungeon in full panic mode and ran directly into Bai Yi and Kai Yin, completely unharmed and perfectly calm. The protagonist looked at the teachers and asked why they had all come in. The teacher explained that the energy fluctuation had made them think the seal had broken. But now, standing here looking at the two of them, it was clear they had overreacted. Shortly before leaving for the day, Zeeling made his way to the student guild's vice captain. Looking to fill an open spot on the team, the vice captain informed him that someone else had already been selected. Zeeling couldn't hide the devastation on his face. He had been convinced that spot was his. He couldn't understand why he'd been passed over. Then the guild captain spoke, said they had found someone with more talent. Her name was He Li, and she stated plainly that Bai Yi was more interesting than any other student she had seen. Meanwhile, somewhere else entirely on the same day, inspection team investigator Chen Jinwoo, the same person who had helped with Bai Yi's father's arrest, was outside the prison talking to the man directly. He told him it hadn't been easy to arrange this and warned him not to cause any more trouble. Chen Jinwoo informed him that Captain Hong would be arriving shortly and that Mr. Bai already knew what was expected of him. Right then, a call came in from his superior. Chen Jinwoo announced he had to leave. He added that Mr. Bai was perfectly capable of finding his own way home. Bai Yi's father said nothing, but he was already anxious, already thinking. When he got back, the apartment was empty. His wife and son were nowhere to be found. He started breaking things immediately, demanding to know how they had dared to run from him. The rage built fast, and by the time it peaked, he had convinced himself that when he found them, he was going to make them pay for it. Meanwhile, the protagonist had already presented his mother with one half of the resonance jade. He told her to keep it on her at all times without exception. The other half stayed with Bai Yi. He explained how it worked. If she was ever in danger, all she had to do was break her half. The signal would reach him instantly. Only then, he said, would he be able to leave home without constantly worrying about her. Bai Yi thought about it. His mother had never received anything like that. Honestly, she'd barely had the basics that every person deserved. She told him he shouldn't spend all his time tethered to her. At his age, he should be out having fun with people his own age. Bai Yi told her he was fine, he didn't need friends. She disagreed firmly. Friends weren't optional, she said. Having people you could actually count on was essential. Bai Yi let the memory surface. He'd had friends once. He found himself wondering, in this life, would he find them again? Sometime later, Bai Yi made his way to another demonic lair. With his immediate problems handled, it was time to focus on the one thing that never stopped mattering: getting stronger. He'd tracked down a layer that most people avoided because of how brutal it was. With one purpose in mind, Bai Yi stepped into the dungeon. He reflected on the life he'd already lived. He had reached the upper ranks of a warrior. He'd been powerful. And it still hadn't been enough to save the people beside him. He wasn't going to make the same mistakes twice. Strength alone wasn't the full answer, he understood that now, but even so, evolving was non-negotiable. And this time around, Bai Yi had made a deliberate choice to keep to himself. In his mind, there was no value in building a team. Better to focus entirely on himself, because the day the gods decided to move their pieces again, dying alone would be infinitely preferable to watching his friends be taken out in front of him. Above everything else, he needed to become stronger than anyone standing against him. And he intended to get there as fast as possible, even if that meant fighting at the edge of what his body could handle. He still considered himself weak, couldn't even guarantee he'd win against his own father in a straight fight right now. The man who had killed him in his past life, an entirely different conversation. There were no shortcuts, and quitting wasn't an option that existed for him. The only path forward was to grow all the way to the top, until he had surpassed every enemy standing between him and what he came back to do. Facing the monsters head-on, the protagonist activated Sanctuary, cleared several of them in one sweep, but the clock was a problem the dungeon gate was preparing to shut. He still needed to take down the boss. Before that window closed, he didn't have to search long. Bai squared up with the monster, fully aware this was the final test. What he hadn't fully accounted for was the speed. The boss was faster than his read on it. Level 20 Yi Wu Ming. But the protagonist wasn't standing around waiting for it to make the first move. He struck before the boss could commit to an attack. The boss took the hit and recovered almost immediately, resetting its stance ready to go again. Bai clocked it. The regeneration on this thing was operating at an abnormal level. In response, the monster drove its attack into the ground, sending roots spreading beneath the surface. Carnivorous plants burst up from the earth. The protagonist, who had thought he'd already cleared the area, quickly realized his mistake. A rank D boss should not have been capable of anything close to this, and it wasn't done surprising him. He took a hit from behind. A second boss had entered the fight. Yi Wu Ming's twin brother. Now Bai was dealing with both of them at the same time. Naturally, that meant the dungeon run was going to take considerably longer than planned. Back home, his mother was pacing. Her son hadn't come back, hadn't sent any word, and the worry was becoming something harder to sit with. Eventually, she couldn't stay put any longer. She grabbed her things and went out to look for him. At the same time, the protagonist's father was making his way through the rain, somehow having discovered that his wife and son had rented an apartment in the city. And he was already on his way there, with revenge the only thing on his mind. Stepping out of the building's entrance, the protagonist's mother stopped, because what was in front of her was not something she had been prepared to see. Inside the dungeon, the protagonist was running on fumes. He had defeated the monsters 5 times over, and they kept coming back. Worse, none of the kills counted for experience. Reanimated creatures didn't drop points. He had to find a way to end this on his terms, because if his energy ran out first, he'd be the one at the monster's mercy. Bai observed that the regeneration wasn't limited to just the smaller monsters. He activated his acceleration ability to crank up the tempo. His goal was to hit faster than their regeneration could cycle, overwhelm the healing with pure speed. Even landing critical hits, it didn't matter. Nothing stuck. Even the bosses had instant healing built in. Heads removed, bodies still moving. They simply refused to go down. Bai concluded that this situation was fundamentally broken. Even S-rank healers couldn't pull off regeneration at this scale. His working theory was that either someone external was feeding power into this ability, or there was an energy reservoir somewhere nearby. While he was thinking it through, one of the monsters decided not to wait. Bai managed to defend himself, but only barely. Then he noticed something that changed the picture. The boss had been studying his fighting patterns and was now mirroring his movements back at him. The monster opened its mouth and spoke, told him he was strong. Bai had faced a lot of things across 10 years of combat. A talking monster was a first. He worked through the logic. A plant-based demonic lair like this one would require an energy center. And the most likely candidate was the massive tree the boss had been protecting. He decided to test it. His theory was that if the energy source was cut off, the healing would stop. No fuel, no regeneration. The monster read his intention immediately and moved to stop him. But Bai was already cutting. He took down the trees in rapid succession, convinced this was the play that turned the fight. He was right. Those trees were the source of everything the enemy had been using. The boss threw everything it had at trying to stop him. It wasn't fast enough. Bai moved through the grove and brought every tree down. With the power supply gone, the playing field was about to look very different. The enemies lunged and didn't reach him in time, because the moment the trees fell, Bai froze them. All of them, locked in place exactly where he needed them. Now he could attack without splitting his attention. He'd known something was off with his original approach, and now that he'd corrected it, the results were immediate. The moment the trees were gone, the enemy's power dropped sharply. The gap had finally opened. He took down the first boss and banked a solid chunk of experience for it. Watching its twin fall, the other monster managed to shatter the ice holding it, but Bai wasn't concerned. The threat level on this boss had dropped significantly. Then the remaining boss did something unexpected. It surrendered, asked to be put down. Bai genuinely couldn't recall ever seeing a boss behave like that, but a request was a request, so he honored it. He brought it down cleanly and collected what it left behind. A poisonous thorn, one of the core components needed to forge the infinite poison spear. a weapon of considerable power, and with the boss down, the dungeon entrance opened back up. But before heading out, Bai checked his stats and noticed his level had climbed sharply. He was on the verge of unlocking a new class. The transformation completed, and it was a blue class, a flower summoner. Not exactly what he would have picked, but the fact that it didn't demand heavy attribute investment made it workable. He wasn't deeply familiar with its abilities yet, but one detail immediately grabbed his attention. This class could form contracts with evil spirits. Bai turned that over in his mind and concluded that maybe the bosses he had just defeated didn't have to stay defeated. He looked over and spotted their souls hovering above their bodies. He approached and made contact. Then he activated the spirit contract ability. The twins were now bound to him, ready to appear whenever Bai called on them. Sometime later, Bai's father's phone rang. Officer Chen informed him that he had secured a seat for Bai's father at Captain Hong's dinner. He confirmed immediately, said he'd bring a meaningful gift. He saw this as his path back into the guild. After hanging up, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Today was shaping up to be a good day. He decided while he was at it, he'd pay his sister a visit. Meanwhile, Bai's mother was still outside, still worried. Then Bai arrived and immediately asked her what she was doing standing in the rain. He moved to bring her back inside. Once they were in, he placed a gift in her hands. He told her the delay was because he'd been out looking for the best Mother's Day gift he could find, but she knew him and she could tell he was keeping something from her. She made a quiet note to herself that she was going to find out what it was. Meanwhile, Bai retreated to his room to rest. He took stock of where he stood, 3 distinct classes now in his arsenal. 2 of them had reached rank D, and still, he knew it wasn't enough, because sooner or later his father was going to surface. And knowing the man, he had likely already found a way to bribe one of the guards into getting him out ahead of schedule. That was exactly why Bai had been pushing so hard. He wasn't going to be caught underprepared, not this time. The next day, he was heading into another dungeon. Convinced that before anything else could move forward, the immediate threat had to be dealt with first. Running wasn't an option. So the only play was to keep climbing, take every opportunity to grow stronger and waste none of it. That was why he kept targeting dungeons above his current level. Only by challenging things beyond his reach could he build the kind of strength he'd actually need. Because when the moment came to face a truly powerful enemy, showing up underprepared wasn't a mistake he could afford to make. Back at the School of the Awakened, Professor Huang stepped in front of the class with the assessment results. She announced that Bai Yi and Kai Yin had taken first and second place across the entire school, the highest scores recorded. Their performance recordings had been submitted directly to the guild for review. Because of those results, both had earned a spot on the training journey, and because of Bai's score specifically, they would be granted a direct audience with the Divine Guild. Even Bai hadn't seen that coming. The possibility of actually meeting the guild face-to-face hadn't crossed his mind. His classmates erupted. As far as they were concerned, Bai was on a path that was going somewhere far beyond what any of them could imagine. After class in the principal's office, Hong Liang asked his nephew, Hong Changsheng, whether he was certain he didn't want to go along with the others. He also mentioned that the boy's father had finally made an appearance to see him. He suggested Changsheng could use that as an opportunity, head to headquarters and join the training journey through his father's connection. Hong Changsheng said no, he had placed third and he was not walking into headquarters on someone else's coattails. He refused to give people any reason to say he depended on his father for everything. Hong Liang looked at his nephew, and for the first time in a while he felt something like genuine respect for the kid. Hong Liang quietly hoped that Changsheng's father would see what he was seeing, that the boy was growing up. Then Hong Changsheng made his request. He wanted access to the sealed rank D dungeon in the back mountain, said he'd use it to push himself further. Meanwhile, a new detail came to light. Ziling was actually the school's general director's nephew. And unlike Changsheng, Ziling had gone straight to his uncle, General Director Zian Qing, practically begging to be included in the training journey, claiming to be the sole heir of the Zai family as if that was supposed to seal the deal. Zian Qing acknowledged that his nephew was the last of their bloodline, but also that he consistently acted on pure impulse with zero regard for consequences. He asked Ziling directly why he had behaved the way he did during the simulated combat. The general director already knew exactly what Ziling had done, manipulated a monster to go after the novices. He stated plainly that the people above them were not fools, and that Zealing thinking he could pull something like that without anyone noticing was an insult to their intelligence. He added that as general director, he had managed to bury what his nephew had done, but made it very clear that if Zealing weren't family, he would have already been expelled. Hearing all of that, Zealing broke down completely, tears running, begging for forgiveness. His uncle had no patience for the performance. He explained that the only reason he had covered for him was because, in an unintended way, Zealing's actions had actually been useful. Because of what Zealing pulled, the higher-ups had been paying even closer attention to Bai Yi, and now they were beginning to suspect there was something genuinely unusual about him. The general director stated that Bai Yi's rate of growth was simply inexplicable, and because of that, someone from the guild had expressed interest in meeting him personally. He also informed Zealing that he would be allowed to join the training journey but warned him to stay in line, because next time not even family ties would be enough to protect him. Zealing lit up at the news. He was going to the guild and more importantly, he'd have another shot at the protagonist. Last time hadn't gone his way, but this time would be different. And on top of that, Zealing had unfinished business with He Li and the others too. Back at school, Bai Yi's friends were buzzing with excitement on his behalf. A direct invitation to the school's strongest guild. That wasn't something that just happened. Normally, candidates went through multiple rounds of testing and most still didn't make it through, but Bai Yi had been invited without jumping through a single hoop. Direct invitations like that were nearly unheard of, and in everyone's eyes, it only confirmed what they already suspected about how special he was. Bai Yi, however, couldn't care less. He picked up the invitation and dropped it straight into the trash, right in front of everyone. Nobody understood it. He just turned around and walked away without a word. His classmates stood there completely stumped, except for the most studious one in the room who had already figured it out. He said quietly that Bai Yi probably had no intention of joining anyone, the way he was moving right now. This was someone who wanted to lead, not follow. After class, Bai Yi headed to the mountain behind the school. He had secured access to the rank D layers there and knew nobody else would be around at night. Accompanying him was Hong Changsheng, who had been the one to arrange the authorization. Bai Yi had planned to go in alone. He figured only he could actually handle what was in there. But Hong Changsheng refused to just stand outside watching. He wanted in, and technically, Bai Yi had promised to teach him how to grow stronger quickly in exchange for access to this layer. He just hadn't expected Changsheng to take that as an invitation to come along for every run. And he definitely hadn't anticipated getting access to all the rank D dungeons in the school either. Either way, the two of them went in, and it became clear pretty fast that Hong Changsheng was struggling. Bai Yi offered to help. Changsheng turned it down, said he could manage on his own, watching him fight. Bai Yi reflected on his own situation. He still hadn't met the requirements to access the warrior's tower, which meant that door was closed for now. Having essentially cleared out every other layer he could find, the school's dungeons were his only real option at the moment. And the higher the awakening rank, the more experience was needed just to push to the next level. After rank D, progress started slowing down in a serious way, when it became obvious that Hong Changsheng was in over his head. Bai Yi stepped in anyway, which annoyed Changsheng to no end. Despite the bruised ego, Hong Changsheng cleared rank D. And he had to admit training without his family's bodyguards hovering over him was a completely different experience, more effective, more real. Bai Yi also leveled up, pushing through to rank C, and with that, he figured he now had enough to handle the problem that had been sitting on the back burner without too much difficulty. When he got home, his mother immediately asked if he had been spending time with any girls. Bai Yi told her no and pointed out that he was still in middle school. She laughed it off and asked why he was getting home so late. Then she told him it was perfectly normal to develop feelings for someone, and that if he did, he shouldn't hold back, because letting those moments pass was the kind of thing people ended up regretting. Bai Yi thought about it. There had been one person, He Li, his former teammate. She had always been upfront about her feelings, making her interest known across missions without ever hiding it. But Bai Yi had always deflected, every time. He was the captain, he took that seriously. Romance and the job didn't mix in his mind, and so he'd kept his wall up no matter how persistent she was, but then he watched her die in front of him. And that had left a mark that never fully healed. In his past life, his master had pulled him back from the edge, saved him from a death sentence. And not long after, he had crossed paths with He Li in the capital of the Sacred Kingdom, but now he didn't even know where she was. In this life, they were strangers, and finding her again felt like an uncertain thing. because only he carried the memory of what they had once been. Even if they met again, they would be meeting for the first time. What Bai Yi didn't know was that Li was closer than he could have imagined. She had just received word that Bai Yi had been ignoring every message her guild sent and had no interest in responding. Li considered that for a moment and decided it only made things more interesting. She would have to speak with him herself. Then Bai Yi's birthday arrived. His mother handed him the gift she had promised. He opened the box, unwrapped the layers carefully, and found inside a card from her. The gift was a scarf. He stared at it for a second. It was the middle of summer. He looked up and asked her if she had known all along that he was planning to go to the sacred realm. She confirmed it and explained that the sacred realm ran cold and that he would need to dress for it. Bai Yi sat with that for a moment. She'd known the whole time. There was no point pretending otherwise anymore. Still, his mother suggested that since it was his birthday, he should call some friends and celebrate. He told her he didn't have any, but then, back at school, he was caught completely off guard. One of his old friends appeared with a gift in hand, an action figure of his favorite model placed directly into Bai Yi's hands. Then the nerdy classmate stepped up with his own gift. Bai Yi unwrapped it and found the original tape of his favorite movie. He genuinely didn't know what to say. In his past life, he and the nerd used to ditch class just to watch old films together. He hadn't expected anyone to remember that. The nerd quietly asked him not to let the teachers find out and hoped he liked it. Bai Yi thanked him he meant it. Then Kai Yin appeared also with a gift. His classmates immediately started exchanging glances. A girl bringing Bai Yi a birthday present. This was news. They got a closer look and realized it was an enchanted gem, a ranked weapon. Bai Yi told her it was too much and that he couldn't take it. Kai Yin explained that without him, she wouldn't have made it onto the training journey, and she wanted to thank him in a way that actually meant something. She added that to her family, the item wasn't particularly valuable, but for Bai Yi specifically, it would be far more useful than it ever would be sitting in their collection. Bai Yi thought about it honestly. Turning down something like that would genuinely be a waste. He also realized she must have seen him using a more basic magic weapon and chosen this specifically because of that. He noticed her attention to detail. And beyond the gift itself, he felt something shift. Even with the cold front he'd been putting up, every single one of them had remembered his birthday and shown up for him. Meanwhile, the boys were quietly losing their minds trying to figure out when Kai Yin and Bai Yi had gotten this close. Kai Yin caught them whispering and asked what they were on about. Looking for a way to return the kindness, Bai Yi told everyone dinner was on him. His friends' jaws dropped, and then they were very, very happy. As they were getting ready to head out, the protagonist noticed a group of high school students moving toward his classroom. They were talking outside about the guild leader's visit to the school. Apparently she was known for her beauty, and half the building was trying to catch a glimpse of her. Bai Yi connected the dots immediately. All this commotion was because of him. He decided the best move was to deal with it quickly and cleanly. In the middle of all the noise and shuffling, Zealing was also waiting, eager to see the guild leader arrive. But even in that anticipation, resentment was quietly festering. Was Bai Yi really so significant that the guild leader would come all the way here just to speak with him personally? The protagonist stepped into the corridor. And without any warning, a figure shot through the crowd at blinding speed. Bai Yi's instincts fired immediately. The figure was moving like nothing he'd seen from a student, cutting through the hallway and leaving an impact trail in its wake. He read it as a test and shifted into combat stance. The moment his hand went to his dagger, the figure reversed direction in an instant. Bai Yi recognized the speed for what it was. This was an opponent operating on an entirely different tier. He braced and managed to defend himself before the hit could land. The rest of the hallway hadn't even registered what happened. Then Li revealed herself. She stepped back after the exchange and told him plainly his reflexes were genuinely impressive. She said she had made the right call inviting him to her guild. Bai Yi stood there in complete shock. Of all the ways he had imagined this reunion going, this was not it. Li explained that the guild had sent multiple invitations, and since he hadn't responded to a single one, she had decided to handle it personally. Bai Yi's classmates watched the interaction and quietly assumed there was no way he was going to reject the guild leader directly to her face. Too awkward even for him. Li decided she should probably introduce herself properly. But before she could get the words out, Bai Yi closed the distance and pulled her into a hug. The entire hallway went silent. Zealing included, standing there looking like he had just witnessed something that violated the laws of physics. Bai Yi told her quietly, genuinely, how good it was to see her again after so long. He Li had absolutely no idea what to do with that. Neither did anyone else watching, nobody had seen that coming. The nerdy classmate was the only one composed enough to offer any context. He Li was the same age as Bai Yi, despite how she carried herself. She had been in the same class as them once but had awakened her abilities ahead of everyone else. He Li pulled back, clearly flustered, but recovered quickly and asked if she could take that hug as a yes to her invitation. She made her case. The guild could offer everything he needed, including the resources to push his growth as far as it could go. Bai Yi told her no. Joining someone else's guild made no sense for where he was headed. He explained that he intended to build his own, and when that day came, maybe they'd fight side by side. At that point, the guild's vice leader appeared in the corridor. He informed He Li that Captain Hong had returned to campus and that the board was requesting they go welcome him. He Li told Bai Yi they would see each other again on the training trip. They'd have more time to talk then, including about the fact that he had mentioned not seeing her in a long time. She filed that away as she walked off. Zealing was absolutely seething, and he wasn't the only witness. The whole hallway had seen it and people were already talking. Mainly because instead of shutting Bai Yi down after the hug, He Li had treated him like someone she actually respected. That alone was enough to send the rumor mill into overdrive. Bai Yi himself hadn't planned any of that, he had acted on pure instinct. In his past life, the team had an unspoken rule: no one dug into each other's pasts, which meant Bai Yi had never known that He Li had gone to the same school as him. Either way, he thought to himself, without question, this was the strangest birthday he had ever had. After class, Bai Yi took his friends to the steakhouse as promised. While the group enjoyed themselves, Kai Yin asked Bai Yi if he was serious about forming a guild and what he meant when he said he wouldn't be staying around for long. He told her that after the training journey, he intended to stay in the sacred realm. His nerdy friend immediately asked if Bai Yi was planning to drop out and just open a guild. Bai Yi clarified it wasn't quite like that. What he actually intended was to try to gain entry into the Divine Weapon Academy, located within the sacred realm itself. Meanwhile, over at the Kaiban Hotel, Captain Hong had arrived. His colleagues greeted him like he was royalty walking through the door. Captain Hong absolutely loved every second of it. He entered the lobby with the police captain at his side, who immediately froze when he spotted Bai Lingsheng at the party. He turned to his subordinate and demanded to know how that man was out of prison ahead of schedule. The subordinate explained that Bai Lingsheng had paid double the bail with the commander's approval, and had requested the vice captain look the other way. The vice captain was not pleased, not even slightly, especially not with Bai Lingsheng showing up at Captain Hong's welcome reception of all places. The subordinate added that Bai Lingsheng had been unfairly expelled from the guild and was making a move to get back in. He had brought everything he had as a gesture of goodwill. It didn't matter, his valuable ores landed him nothing, because Captain Hong took one look at him and made his feelings very clear. He stated that the Divine Guild had reserved the entire venue exclusively for its members. Someone like Bai Lingsheng, a disgraced former member, had no business being in that room. While Bai Lingsheng scrambled to collect his ores from the floor, still trying to get a word in, Captain Hong grabbed him by the collar and made his final position known. With the reputation Bai Lingsheng had built for himself, trying to buy his way back was shameless. It would not be tolerated. He told him to get out and never come back, and ordered that from that moment on, nobody in the group was to let that man anywhere near them. Publicly humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to him, Bai Lingsheng snapped. He swore they would all pay for treating him like that. He stormed out of the hotel, and as he moved through the streets, his mind was already constructing ways to make every single one of them suffer. Meanwhile, by a deeply unfortunate twist of fate, Bai Yi's mother had stepped out of the apartment, and Bai Lingsheng crossed her path. Back at the restaurant, the protagonist was still with his friends, watching some members of the Divine Guild nearby. One of his friends commented that if Bai Yi joined the guild, he could reach their level, maybe even surpass them. For his part, Bai Yi just thought the day had been surprisingly good overall. He found himself wondering if fate was giving him a birthday gift, but something else was there too, a feeling he couldn't shake. A quiet premonition that something bad was coming. And while he sat there raising a toast with his friends, his mother was already in trouble far away. Bai Lingsheng, burning with rage and looking for somewhere to put it, had found his target. He muttered that his wife was out here living comfortably while he had been going through everything alone. He wanted to remind her of exactly what happened when people didn't operate by his rules. Then he noticed the bracelet on her wrist and demanded to know who had given it to her. The bracelet caught the light with a faint, subtle glow. She froze in fear, and in that moment Bai Lingsheng started laughing. He declared that it all made sense now, the nice apartment, the bracelet. He accused her of finding another man. Consumed entirely by fury, he moved to assault her. But the bracelet Bai Yi had given his mother reacted before he could reach her. From the magical object, something emerged, placing itself directly between Bai Lingsheng and the woman he was advancing on. The twins, the boss spirits the protagonist had previously defeated, now stood as her guardians. She had no idea, she hadn't known they were there at all. The surprise hit her just as hard as the scene itself. But Bai Yi had planned for exactly this because preparation was the one thing he never skipped. The twin spirits moved to engage the attacker immediately, pushing Bai Lingsheng away from the woman they were bound to protect. Initially, the force of the guardian's strike sent Bai Lingsheng stumbling back, but he steadied himself and declared that he had just found exactly what he needed to vent his fury on. Back at the restaurant, Bai Yi was still sitting with his friends when the amulet on his chest began to vibrate. He didn't need a second signal. Something serious was happening. He was already moving. Shortly before, he had reached out to Hong Changsheng to check on something they had previously discussed. Hong Changsheng confirmed it. Bai Yi's father had been released earlier than expected. He had even shown up at Captain Hong's reception, but after being thrown out, nobody had seen him since. Bai Yi tried calling his mother. No answer. That was all the confirmation he needed. He was already heading home. Pushing the bicycle as fast as it would go, he knew that even with the twins guarding her, their power ceiling was well below his father's. They could delay him, they couldn't stop him. And Bai Lingsheng had already taken down one of the twins, still had more than enough left in the tank to keep going. The fallen twin was trying to hold on from the ground, but Bai Lingsheng finished it without mercy. With one guardian down, he declared he'd do the same to the other. As he closed in on the remaining twins, the guardian read the danger and threw everything into one last effort to restrain him. And as it did, it urged Bai Yi's mother to run. Don't look back, just go. She was terrified, but she listened and she ran. The guardian used its own body to try and hold the threat in place, but Bai Lingsheng was stronger and it didn't take long before he broke free. Once loose, he declared that there was nowhere his wife could run to that he wouldn't find her. He caught up to her and asked where she thought she was going. Bai Lingsheng made it clear there was no escape. His eyes dropped to the jade pendant around her neck, and he ripped it off her. He assumed it was just another gift from whoever she had supposedly been with. Without a second thought, Bai Lingsheng destroyed it. And then he advanced on her without an ounce of restraint. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the pendant was the signal. The moment it broke, Bai Yi appeared right there, just in time. Even so, his mother was so shaken that even seeing her son materialize out of nowhere scared her. Bai Lingsheng was equally thrown. He hadn't expected this at all. The protagonist looked at his father and said it with complete calm. This was the last time Bai Lingsheng would put his hands on this family, and he intended to end the situation once and for all. In his past life, the last time his parents had a confrontation like this, everything had spiraled. He had tried to step in, but he had been chained down, completely powerless. All he could do was watch. His mother had taken him out for a walk and hadn't thought to tell her husband. Bai Lingsheng had gone out looking for work and come back empty-handed, and every ounce of that frustration had landed on his wife the moment he walked through the door. Watching all of it happen, something broke loose in Bai Yi. The trauma triggered a second activation. He tore through the chains and put himself between his father and his mother. Bai Lingsheng had turned his violence toward the boy too. But the rage Bai Yi was feeling in that moment, it became something else entirely: fuel. And with it, he had put an end to his family's suffering. But that same day, he lost both his father and his mother. Since then, he had carried on without a family. But in this life, he had chosen differently, and he refused to be helpless ever again when it came to the people he loved. Because Bai Lingsheng was not facing a defenseless child this time. Bai Lingsheng covered his surprise quickly and admitted he hadn't expected his son to show up, but he decided it was convenient actually. He had been planning to deal with the boy too. The protagonist didn't show even a flicker of fear. Quite the opposite, he launched in hard and fast. The impact sent Bai Lingsheng staggering. But what caught the man's attention more than the pain was what he was looking at. His son was wielding the Kun Wu blade. His blade, he very much wanted to know how the boy had gotten his hands on his weapon. Setting that aside for now, Bai Yi instructed the twins to get his mother out of there and keep her safe. Bai Lingsheng took in the summoning and landed on a conclusion: his son was a dual elementalist. He found that genuinely interesting. He said it was exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from a son of his. But then he made his position clear: inheriting his father's talent wasn't going to be enough. He hadn't forgotten what the boy had done, and that wasn't going unpunished. Bai Lingsheng declared that the kid was overstepping, and that it was past time someone taught him some respect. And with that, he attacked. Bai Yi's mother watched, terrified for her son, but Bai Yi was already prepared. He activated his ice ability and slowed the aggressor's advance. Bai Lingsheng couldn't understand how that had happened. Then the protagonist revealed it. He wasn't limited to 2 classes, and none of it had anything to do with Bai Lingsheng. This power was entirely his own. Bai Yi then looked his father dead in the eye and told him exactly what he thought of him: complete and utter trash. Bai Lingsheng refused to be intimidated. He argued that no matter how many classes Bai Yi possessed, raw combat experience was a gap that couldn't be closed overnight. He'd been doing this for years. There was a reason he, and not his son, was the head of the family. But the moment Bai Lingsheng broke free of the ice, Bai Yi was already coming at him again. He didn't stop, not once. He kept pressing until Bai Lingsheng had nothing left to counter with. Bai Lingsheng felt his defense collapse and the blow land clean. He couldn't process it. He demanded to know how the boy had pulled that off. Bai Yi told him simply he didn't owe the old man any explanations. Because they were no longer family, he told Bai Lingsheng to stay away from his mother. That was not a suggestion. The next time, there would be no mercy shown. Bai Lingsheng let out a short laugh. He started talking about how he had sacrificed everything for the family, and all he had ever received in return was ingratitude. He added that as long as he was breathing, Bai Yi would always be his son. That bond didn't break just because the boy wanted it to. Bai Yi disagreed without hesitation. He struck and sent Bai Lingsheng sliding back. Bai Lingsheng tried to retaliate, but couldn't get within range to land anything meaningful. And when the next hit connected, Bai Lingsheng found himself wondering how his own son, someone who had only just awakened, had grown this strong this fast. He himself was a red class rank C. Being taken apart by a kid who shouldn't be anywhere near his level made no sense. Bai Yi told him there was no point in resisting. He needed to stop now. He said it plainly. Throughout his entire life, Bai Lingsheng had solved everything with violence. But his targets had always been people who couldn't fight back. He had never once faced someone who could actually match him. So Bai Yi declared it clearly: someone like that had no right to a family. And he added with complete conviction that Bai Lingsheng didn't even deserve to be called a man. Consumed by everything that had built up over 2 lifetimes, the protagonist drove Bai Lingsheng's face into the ground. His mother stood there watching. She had never seen her son like this, not once. From the ground, Bai Lingsheng tried a different angle. He asked the boy to reconsider, said that above everything, he was the one who had raised him from the very beginning. Blood had to count for something. But the protagonist asked him directly, had that blood tie ever stopped him from assaulting his own family? He said that Bai Lingsheng had always been cruel. No matter how much his wife or son begged, he never showed a single moment of compassion. He had always reached for violence first, never once stopping to consider that he was doing this to his own family. Which meant they had never had a single ordinary day while he was in their lives. So he had no standing to speak in his own defense, because a man who did what he did didn't deserve a family. Flat on the ground, Bai Lingsheng apologized, said he recognized his mistakes, promised it would never happen again. But watching it, Bai Yi remembered. In his past life, Bai Lingsheng had done exactly the same thing. The moment he realized he was outmatched, he performed repentance. And the moment Bai Yi let his guard down, his father had attacked him from behind. He wasn't falling for the same trick twice. His adrenaline was still running, and he had already decided there was only one way this ended. His mother tried to stop him from going too far, from doing something that couldn't be undone. But Bai Yi argued that the only real way for someone like this to truly stop was to ensure he never had another chance to act again. Staring at what looked like the end, Bai Lingsheng started bargaining for his life. But the protagonist wasn't hearing it. His resolve didn't waver. He summoned his ice powers and moved to silence Bai Lingsheng permanently. Bai Yi held the justification for it in his mind. He had been here before, and last time he had hesitated. Then he heard his mother's voice, not a plea, a real voice, her actual voice calling out to stop him. The guardian spirit had done something unexpected. It had lent its voice to her. Through it, she asked her son not to become the same kind of person his father was. She said Bai Lingsheng had already lost the one thing that mattered to him most, his pride. He would live out the rest of his days consumed by bitterness and regret. And that, she said, was already punishment enough. She added that she didn't want to watch her son turn into something monstrous, because that was exactly what would happen if he went through with this. And beyond that, she didn't want to spend her days visiting him in prison, which is where this path led. Bai Yi let it land. But he made one thing clear: he would find a way to make absolutely certain Bai Lingsheng was never a threat again. He then used an ability called Judgment, channeling it directly into Bai Lingsheng. Bai Yi permanently severed his access to his awakened abilities. From that moment forward, Bai Lingsheng was an ordinary man, no powers, nothing. Bai Yi told him to leave the city and never come back into their lives. He also warned that if the old man ever tried to approach his mother again, the guardian would be there, and it would not be gentle about it. And if he committed any hostile act after this, Bai Yi made clear he would show up personally, prison or not. Faced with that ultimatum, Bai Lingsheng had no moves left. Sometime later, Bai Yi was home. He had left the twins with the explicit task of watching over his mother at all times. Bai Yi said he was glad he had arrived in time, because if he hadn't, the outcome would have been very different. His mother reassured him that she was all right. Even so, Bai Yi said he would get her a new pendant. She thanked him, and then something happened that stopped him cold. He heard her voice, her real voice, not the guardian's, his mother's own voice. She didn't quite know what had happened, but the guardian's spirit explained. The loss of her voice had been the result of an old wound, one that it had been able to heal. Sometime later, the guardian quietly asked Bai Yi, was he really planning to leave and be away from his mother? After everything that had just happened, Bai Yi explained that he had already covered the rent, and when he had enough saved, he'd buy the place outright. He had also prepared a new pendant for her, but he still needed the twins watching over her full time while he was gone. He acknowledged that his mother knew he was leaving for a reason. What she didn't know was about his past life and everything he had already lived through. Despite all of it, Bai Yi still carried a weight of hatred, rooted in what had been done to him and to his team. Because of that, he felt the pull toward the sacred realm with a certainty he couldn't ignore. That was where his revenge was waiting, and this time he would arrive there earlier than he ever had before, which could be the advantage that changed everything. Even without knowing if he would succeed or even come back, he was prepared to leave everything behind and go. While walking with his mother through the city one afternoon, she mentioned almost offhand that she had nearly forgotten to pray. Every year, on the first full moon of the summer holidays, the great mage of the flower goddess temple returned to Chushi City. Bai Yi had forgotten entirely that his mother was a devoted follower of the flower goddess. He had also never told her exactly when he was leaving. He had figured it was better to go quietly, because goodbyes had always been the one thing he was worst at. Sometime later, his friend received the news that his surgery had gone well. The boy's parents were deeply grateful. He himself tried to brush it off as nothing major, but his mother wasn't letting that slide. She pointed out that surgeries like that were not simple procedures and that gratitude was more than warranted. She also told him to rest properly before doing anything else. The young man wasn't exactly thrilled about staying put. His friends were leaving and he at least wanted to send them off. The day of departure arrived. Kai Yin's mother said her goodbyes, telling her daughter to remind her father not to stay at work too late when she saw him. The school officials clarified for the gathered parents that the trip would only be 15 days, so the dramatic send-offs were perhaps a bit much. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood waiting for the train alone. His teacher noticed and came over to ask if Bai Yi's parents couldn't make it to see him off. He simply said no. Teacher Wang asked if he had always been this self-sufficient. Bai Yi thought to himself that she had no idea what his life actually looked like, but it was better that way. He had gotten used to being alone a long time ago. After losing his family, Bai Yi had lost his closest friend too. And just as he had started to find something real in his teammates, he lost every one of them on that day. So many losses stacked one on top of another, until silence and solitude became the default. Goodbyes had stopped meaning anything to him, so he stopped having them. Professor Huang announced the train's arrival and told everyone to get ready. Bai Yi's mind was already on what was ahead. Then a familiar voice called his name. He turned and wasn't prepared for what he saw. His mother had come, and his friends were with her. Even Lin Liu had broken out of the hospital just to be there. Someone warned him he was going to be in serious trouble if his parents found out. Bai Yi immediately told the nerd off he was supposed to be recovering from surgery. Lin Liu said he was fine and then admitted, a little sheepishly, that what had actually brought him there was the need to tell Bai Yi to be careful. His friends had come prepared, they had brought clothes and food for him. Even Kai Yin seemed moved, seeing just how much Bai Yi was cared about, and his mother had brought something too. A bracelet from the flower goddess temple. She said it would protect him, that just as he had once given her something meaningful, she wanted to give him something that would stay with him on his journey. Bai Yi realized she had gone to the temple for him specifically, and he suspected she already knew deep down that he wasn't planning on coming home anytime soon. Professor Wang announced that the train was boarding. Bai Yi said his goodbyes to his friends and his mother, and stepped onto the train. He reflected on how much had already changed since his return, including the people around him. Unlike before, there was someone waiting for him to come back. And for the first time in a long time, he thought that maybe after all of this was done, returning quickly would be worth it. Not far from the platform, a man watched the train pull away. He confirmed to himself that Bai Yi had boarded safely and that the item had reached its destination. It was Liu Zhangjiang, patriarch of the Flower Goddess Temple. He thought quietly that everything from this point forward was up to Bai Yi alone. Inside the carriage, the professor explained that the guild had arranged the sea crossing, and that they would be reaching the border of the John Kingdom before long. With that, the training journey had officially begun. She informed the students it would take a full day to enter the Sacred Kingdom and that according to tradition, they would spend the night at the border to conduct a field training exercise. Zieling heard that and immediately perked up. A training exercise, he was already thinking ahead. Professor Huang explained that the gods, creators and protectors of this world, had granted supreme authority to the divine families. The sacred realm was currently home to 2 gods and their bloodlines. And because of that, everyone entering the country was bound by divine law. No exceptions. To cross from the John Kingdom into the sacred realm, travelers had to pass through 3 checkpoints. They had already cleared the first one when they boarded the train. Every student had received a special invitation issued directly by the sacred realm. Now they were arriving at the second checkpoint. There, everyone would need to register their information and go through a full security screening. Under normal circumstances, this process consumed an entire day, and only after clearing it could they continue. The next day came, and with it, the first combat training session. Set on the coastal border of the John Kingdom, Kai Yin spotted the protagonist and immediately noticed the new outfit and told him he looked older. A group of girls approached older students who had clearly heard about the boy who turned down the school's top guild. Finding Bai Yi interesting, they tried to strike up a conversation. By this point, his reputation had already spread. Everyone on the trip knew who he was. But Bai Yi had no interest in small talk and left them mid-sentence. He was already thinking about the problem. The beasts in this area were too weak. Fighting them wasn't going to move his level in any meaningful direction. Then an older student strolled over, clearly eager to establish himself, declared he had been the top student of his year, and announced that handling beasts in a place like this was no big deal. Zhang Jun, that was his name. He said real combat against beasts was where things actually got challenging. The girls' attention shifted immediately. They were already gravitating toward Zhang Jun. Bai Yi read the room immediately. They wanted someone to protect them. Straightforward. Either way, Professor Huang stepped in to lay out the ground rules. The students on this journey were the school's elite. They were to train within the designated area only, avoid going off alone, and return to camp by 8 in the evening. Zhang Jun said he'd heard all this before and headed off with the 2 girls before she finished. Zieling was equally fired up, wearing the expression of someone who had already been cooking up something he definitely shouldn't be. Meanwhile, inside the sacred realm, Captain Hong arrived at a specific location where an ally was waiting to inform him that Captain Shannon was ready to see him. The Supreme Guild's vice leader remarked that it was an honor for his guild to share the same train as the captain and that bypassing the checkpoints entirely was a privilege not lost on him. In turn, the captain instructed Hong Changsheng to wait with the squad. The young man had no real choice but to go along with it. Back in the desolate land, Zhang Jun was putting on a show, and the girls on his team were thrilled to be there for it. Bai Yi, meanwhile, was locked into his own training. He knew he needed stronger beasts to actually push his level, and they weren't here. Picking off low-level creatures wasn't a good use of his time or energy. While he was working through that problem, Zhang Jun took a hit from a creature that was clearly above his actual level. And when he went down, the girls who had been hovering around him had no idea what to do. They froze. At that moment, the creature pivoted to Bai Yi as the next target. Unlike the others, he had no intention of backing off. One strike, the threat was done. He didn't even bother checking what the monster dropped. It wasn't worth his time. Bai Yi had already concluded that this location had nothing worth his effort. Time to find something that actually challenged him. He pushed deeper into the area and came across clusters of magic crystals. He noticed immediately that these weren't random formations. Crystals like these typically developed in demonic layers or regions dense with beast activity, but the energy inside them was nearly gone, drained. And from the looks of it, the draining had happened a while ago. The trees in the area showed the same signs, sap dry. Bai Yi found himself asking what kind of creature could pull that much energy out of an environment. He kept moving and eventually reached the end of the trail. Inspecting the ground more carefully, he found something, a strange flask lying in the dirt. On it was an inscription identifying it as belonging to Zifeng Industries. By the time night fell, training was wrapping up. The teacher had prepared dinner using beast meat harvested from the training area. She explained that combat training in the wild meant learning to find food on your own. It was a core survival skill in hostile environments. Some students stared at their plates with visible reluctance. Others dug in without a second thought. Then someone pointed out that Bai Yi hadn't come back to camp yet. Kai Yin remarked on how impressive teacher Wang was, not just strong in theory but clearly capable of applying her knowledge in the field. Wang admitted that before becoming a teacher, she had trained and tried to qualify for the Divine Guild. She hadn't made the cut. She confided in Kai Yin quietly that this was actually her first time in the sacred realm, and asked her to keep it between them. She added that it was because of Kai Yin and Bai Yi that she had finally gotten the chance to see the place she had always wanted to visit. While they were talking, Kai Yin barely caught the shift in the air. But the teacher did, and her instincts kicked in immediately. She pulled Kai Yin out of the way just in time, and took the hit herself. Kai Yin watched it happen right in front of her. The rest of the students scrambled, trying to understand what was attacking them and from where. Meanwhile, Bai Yi was already moving back toward camp at full speed. He had found what he feared, a powerful demonic beast was loose in the area. But he hadn't made it back in time. The teacher had already taken the first hit. Huang shouted for the students to get to the nearest guild immediately. She knew what she was dealing with, a rank B demonic beast. Her plan was to hold its attention long enough for the students to get clear. What had actually happened earlier that same day, Zieling had set his plan into motion. He was sick of watching Bai Yi take every moment of recognition for himself. He wanted payback. So he had brought a demonic beast with him and released it, letting it feed on the environment's energy to grow stronger. His plan was simple in theory. Wait for the chaos, wait for everyone to be weakened or down, then step in as the hero who saved the day. Fame, respect, everything Bai Yi had gotten redirected to him, except the beast had grown well beyond what he had planned for. Zieling found himself with zero control over the situation. The creature had become something he couldn't manage anymore. It was no longer his tool. It was just a threat. So he did what came naturally to him. He backed away and stayed out of it, leaving everyone else to deal with what he had created. Because of his recklessness, Professor Huang had taken the first blow, and others were following. Sprinting back, the protagonist recalled a rank S creature he had faced in his past life, one that had tested him harder than almost anything else. From that experience, he knew this type of enemy hit hard and absorbed damage well. A difficult combination. And the most powerful person currently at that camp was Professor Huang, rank C, significantly below a rank B beast. The protagonist knew he couldn't bring this thing down without going all in. But going all in meant everyone present would see exactly what he was capable of. And that kind of visibility could draw the attention of the so-called gods. He filed that concern away for now and focused on the teacher. She had already realized that the monster had put down roughly half the class, and she had noticed something else: its attacks left behind paralysis. She was running out of options fast. The creature wasn't just attacking, it was feeding, draining energy from whoever it hit. Kai Yin had held out the longest of anyone, but even she was running out of room to maneuver. Then the beast lined up another attack and something hit it first. Wang stepped forward and declared she was not going to let that creature reach her students. She drew all of its attention onto herself. Completely and deliberately, The creature turned and came for her, closing in for the finishing blow. And Bai Yi arrived. He positioned himself directly in front of the teacher and absorbed the attack, retaliating immediately. Professor Huang was still standing. Bai Yi assessed quickly his current power wasn't enough to end this clean, not against a rank B. But he had another play. He activated a blast device and aimed it at the creature, and froze it solid. The problem was that everyone present had just watched him switch classes in real time. Bai Yi accepted it. There wasn't much he could do about it now. He wasn't going to let people die just to keep his secret. Teacher Huang, even in the state she was in, was more worried about her student than herself. And the monster wasn't finished. It pulled off something none of them had anticipated. It vanished completely from sight. The student's fear spiked immediately. But Bai Yi knew the danger hadn't gone anywhere. The creature could come back from any direction at any moment. And with his current output, taking it down wasn't realistic. What he could do was buy enough time to get everyone out. The teacher told the students to move ahead. She would stay until she could confirm everyone had cleared the area. That included Zieling, who still hadn't appeared. Huang was responsible for every student and she wasn't leaving anyone behind. The location and timing had been set in advance, and she intended to hold to it. Then the protagonist told her Zieling was the one who had released the creature. A memory surfaced. In his past life, the enemy who had infiltrated his team had been responsible for preparing breakfast. Everyone had eaten without suspecting a thing, including Bai Yi, the team leader. The infiltrator had barely let anything slip the entire time. That restraint was calculated, because he needed everyone to consume the food. On the day of the attack, every member of the squad had been paralyzed, unable to move or respond. He had been lacing their food with a paralyzing agent for an entire month, the perfect setup to neutralize every target at once. Back in the present, the protagonist didn't hesitate. He named Zieling directly. He explained that the Zifeng Industries label belonged to General Director Zian Qing's family and was currently under the management of Zieling's father. The company's laboratory specifically focused on demonic beast research and used specialized vials to store miniaturized species. Bai Yi held up the broken vial he had recovered deep in the forest. He stated plainly that among everyone present, only Zieling would have access to something like that. The conclusion was obvious. From the shadows, Zieling watched all of it unfold. He saw Bai Yi holding the vial and cursed at himself for not cleaning up his trail properly. On top of that, Zieling had to accept that once again Bai Yi had found a way to counter everything he had set in motion. And every time that happened, the hatred he felt toward the protagonist grew a little more. Back with the students, the group had turned against Zieling entirely. They said he deserved severe punishment for what he had done. Zieling heard every word, and it only added fuel to the fire already burning in him. Either way, the teacher insisted they needed to move. Now, she handed the class representative a radio and left her in charge of communications. Then a shot from the distance destroyed the radio before Kai Yin could even use it. Kai Yin caught the edge of the blast and was wounded. Her teacher's concern deepened immediately. The other students looked around, trying to figure out what had just happened. The protagonist already knew exactly who was responsible. A smoke grenade landed in the middle of the group, and a paralyzing gas began spreading through the area. In the confusion and the haze, Zieling appeared, mask on, moving through the smoke. He closed in on the group, his anger directed squarely at the protagonist. He declared that Bai Yi was the real source of all of this, that he had turned everyone against Zieling and his family, and because of that, none of them were leaving this place. The problem for Zieling was that Bai Yi wasn't affected by the gas at all. He walked straight up to Zieling and asked him directly, was he genuinely planning to eliminate all of them? Some students could barely stay on their feet from the gas, but Zieling kept throwing grenades into the crowd without hesitation, no mercy for anyone, including people he had called classmates. He revealed that he had been saving those grenades specifically to use against the creature, because his plan had been to be the one who saved everyone. The hero, not Bai Yi, but since the protagonist had decided to tear that plan apart, everyone who had chosen to praise the wrong person was going to pay for it. Zieling leveled his bow at the protagonist. Before he could release, Professor Huang spoke up. She told him there was still a way back from this, that it wasn't too late to make the right choice. She said she still believed what happened had been an accident, because the Zieling she knew would never intentionally harm people he trained alongside. Zieling replied quietly that it was already too late, there was no going back. Professor Huang felt it, her body was starting to give out. If the gas kept working on her like this, she'd be down like the others soon. Then the protagonist. drew a cut across himself deliberately, and stated that on one thing Zealing was right. There was no going back from what had been done here. He added that it didn't matter how wronged Zealing felt because no justification in the world made what he had done acceptable. None. The fury in him was personal because what he was looking at reminded him too much of his own past. He asked Zealing with barely contained anger how he had the nerve to point a weapon at his own people. Then Bai Yi deflected the fired arrow and closed the distance in an instant. One precise strike of his sword and Zealing's ability to fire another arrow was gone permanently. In the process of that single movement, Zealing's mask shattered, leaving his face fully exposed to the gas he himself had deployed. Bai Yi felt nothing watching it happen. As far as he was concerned, traitors didn't deserve forgiveness. Full stop. Zealing writhed in pain from the strike and screamed that Bai Yi was insane. That everything that had happened was his fault. Bai Yi didn't even blink. He fired back, pointing out that it was Zealing who had hidden in the chaos, watching everything from a safe distance. Then he asked the real question, who was the actual lunatic here? He made it plain, Zealing had engineered this entire disaster. He had created the tragedy and watched it unfold from the shadows. He had put everyone's lives on the line, including his own, all in the name of petty, pathetic revenge. And he had nearly gotten a good portion of their classmates and a teacher killed, people who had nothing to do with any of it. Cornered by the truth, Zealing broke. Tears started coming. He claimed he had stayed hidden out of fear, said he wasn't sure he could take the creature down himself, and that he could explain everything if given the chance. Bai Yi had no interest in hearing it. He told Zealing plainly he had already made his choices. Now it was time to live with the consequences. In his desperation, Zealing started to convince himself that Bai Yi was even more unhinged than he was, because the look on his face made it clear he was absolutely serious about ending this. But Bai Yi didn't kill him. Instead, he activated the same ability he had used on his father, the one that strips a person of their awakened powers entirely. On top of the physical pain still tearing through him, Zealing felt something far worse, his abilities vanishing. Gone. Permanently. Bai Yi applied exactly what he deemed necessary and left Zealing unable to pose a threat to anyone ever again. The spoiled boy who had once had everything handed to him was now curled up on the ground, sobbing with nothing left, begging for help from anyone who would listen. But one problem being solved didn't mean the next one waited politely, because the universe had absolutely terrible timing. Bai Yi heard his teacher cry out the beast from before had returned. He muttered that the timing could not possibly be worse. The gas hadn't touched him like it had the others, but it was still slowing his body down, wearing at his movements in a way he couldn't fully shake. What was already a difficult situation had just become significantly more complicated. But there was no alternative. The monster had to be faced. Then something completely unexpected happened. A bolt of lightning tore out of nowhere and struck the creature dead on, splitting it from top to bottom. It was still standing, but the hit had landed clean. Professor Huang immediately recognized who had fired it. He Li had arrived at exactly the right moment. He Li assessed the creature and admitted openly that this wasn't something she could handle alone. She turned to Bai Yi and asked if he was with her. Even caught off guard by her sudden appearance, Bai Yi didn't hesitate. He shifted into position and readied himself, but the monster activated its camouflage before they could press the advantage. Bai Yi explained what they were dealing with. The creature had an extremely effective concealment ability. He had wounded it earlier, but it had slipped away without leaving a single trace. Even with a leg injury, he kept his head clear and warned that the paralyzing gas was still spreading, and everyone around them was going to be unconscious soon. He scanned the area and realized he was the last person in the class still on their feet. He Li looked at him with visible surprise. His resistance to the gas was something she hadn't expected. As a precaution, she passed him a recovery potion. She also informed him that the guild had been contacted, but she had no idea when reinforcements would actually arrive. They needed to hold out until then. Bai Yi's read on the situation was that the beast was circling, studying its targets, waiting for the exact right opening before committing to a strike. He was right. The creature came in hard shortly after. Bai Yi barely got out of the way of a direct hit. He Li moved to counter immediately, but the monster read her and dodged. Still, even a creature like that couldn't evade everything. One of the follow-up attacks connected. He Li noticed something. Bai Yi's recovery speed was not normal. He told her he was ready to go, and that if they coordinated their attacks, they could win this. He acknowledged that her offense and reflexes were genuinely impressive. But he also reminded her that regardless of her skill level, she was still a student and her safety had to come first. Healy shot back that he was talking as if he wasn't a student himself. Before either of them could continue that argument, the monster rose again. Bai called it they were hitting it together right now. They synced up and launched the combined attack. But this time the monster had adjusted. It absorbed the assault and held its ground and drove Bai back with a single retaliatory blow. Healy called out that she was going in and moved to strike, but her attacks couldn't break through. The monster's defense had stiffened significantly. Bai clocked the danger a second before it hit and tried to warn her. Healy couldn't clear the blast radius in time and took the hit directly. She also realized immediately that the attack carried poison. Bai stepped in and blocked the next strike before it could reach her. He was thinking fast. The creature was adapting. It had started reading their patterns and was now actively defending against Healy's style of attack. On top of that, it was still feeding on the energy of the surrounding area, getting stronger with every passing minute. If this fight dragged on, they weren't going to make it to reinforcements. The math didn't work in their favor, and Healy had taken a serious hit. She wasn't at full capacity. Bai knew he needed to act and fast. A memory surfaced, a training session from his past life where he had posed a question to his team. What was the right call when your opponent was clearly stronger? Healy had answered without hesitation. The correct answer was retreat, but she had followed it up immediately by saying the Divine Squad never retreated. Bai had then explained their contingency for exactly that situation, the rat bait plan. One member draws the enemy's full aggression, forces it to spend everything on attacking and defending, keeps it locked in, while the second member holds position and waits for the precise opening to land the decisive blow. He moved to pull all of the monster's focus onto himself, then instructed Healy to strike the moment he gave her the signal and to use the time before that to recover as much energy as she could. Healy didn't like it. She knew the risk he was taking, and even accounting for his talent, she was fully aware that he couldn't win a solo fight against this thing. But watching him work, even at what was supposedly just a student level, she had to acknowledge that he was operating with the composure and precision of someone who had been doing this for years. He wasn't performing, he was leading. Bai pressed the assault with full intensity and lost his weapon in the process. Healy saw it happen and her heart dropped. Then she watched Bai take a direct hit. Even while absorbing the blow, he told her not to move. Healy couldn't wrap her head around it. How was she supposed to stand there while her teammate was being hit like that, while someone right in front of her was taking that kind of damage? The creature, for its part, had enough awareness to believe the fight was over. It considered humans inferior, nothing more than convenient sources of energy, just prey, always had been, always would be. Bai, bleeding and still, was counting internally. The moment was almost there, then he gave the order, Healy now. She was already moving before he finished saying it. Bai had observed the pattern. Every time the creature sustained an injury, it immediately tried to feed on someone nearby. That instinct was predictable, and the moment it went for the feed, its guard dropped completely. That split-second window of vulnerability was exactly what he had been waiting to exploit. All he had needed was Healy ready at the right position when it opened. One clean strike, that was all it would take. The hit landed and the monster's body seized up, paralyzed on contact. Healy immediately called out that the paralysis wasn't going to hold long, they needed to finish it right now. Bai told her it was enough. This time, it wasn't getting away. He activated his freezing ability and locked the creature solid. Healy blinked and processed what she had just seen. Another class, he had another class. Bai had stopped hiding. At this point, winning mattered more than discretion and he was going to fight with everything he had. Then he loaded up his most powerful attack and let it fly. The monster went down, and as the dust settled, Bai began pulling himself back together from the damage he had taken. Healy stood there quietly reflecting. In that world, possessing multiple classes was extraordinarily rare, even among the most gifted awakened, and seeing someone this young doing it so naturally left her at a genuine loss for words. Then Bai told her it wasn't just 2 classes. It was as many as he wanted. Taking advantage of the aftermath, he moved immediately to absorb the creature's soul and bring it into a contract. That made 2 spiritual contracts with monsters now in his possession, with 4 more slots still available. With the new contract sealed, the protagonist gave the creature a name, Jiangzai. From that point on, he could call on Jiangzai whenever the situation demanded it. Deeply impressed by the class switching she had witnessed, Healy asked him plainly just how far did his powers actually go. Bai Yi simply asked her to keep it to herself. Li understood immediately. If he hadn't gone public with this, he had reasons for keeping it quiet. She agreed to protect his secret without pushing further. Not long after the cavalry arrived, the guild's 26th platoon. The squad leader called out immediately, asking if anyone was down. One look at the creature's remains told him everything. The threat had already been handled. All that was left was getting the injured and unconscious to a secure location after initial treatment. The class representative was still shaken, and the teacher stayed close to keep her grounded. Meanwhile, the squad leader remarked that a monster of that magnitude would have been a serious challenge even for his experienced team. And yet 2 students had managed to contain it. It wasn't hard to see why both were being called prodigies. When Zhang Jun and the girls came around, they immediately expressed their gratitude. Zhang Jun was direct about it. Without Bai Yi, he wasn't sure he would have made it. Meanwhile, Li was being treated by a healer from the platoon who asked her why she had gone at a monster that size without backup. Li kept it vague and reassured her team that the situation had been handled. One of her allies jumped in to cover for her, saying no one should underestimate their boss. She was a genius and always had everything under control. Li thought quietly that this time that wasn't exactly the truth, but she kept that to herself because Bai Yi was something she hadn't fully figured out yet, and that genuinely intrigued her. After the rescue operation, the students were moved to a safe location. Somewhere else in the jungle, Zeeling was running, sprinting away from another creature he himself had released. He tried to justify it in his head. He had released the monster so it would go after others and leave him alone. What Zeeling was very quickly learning was that controlling creatures like that was not remotely as simple as he had assumed. Sometime later, the students were back on the train and the journey resumed. Bai Yi used the downtime to study the creature he had contracted more carefully, learning its limits and capabilities. Meanwhile, the person overseeing the students had already filed a full report to their superiors about everything that had occurred. This made Bai Yi realize something uncomfortable. They were under constant surveillance. And after everything that had just happened, keeping his true abilities concealed was going to be significantly harder going forward. Regardless, the train finally pulled into the long-awaited Sacred Kingdom. Entering the Divine Realm, they arrived at the campus station. Bai Yi took it all in with quiet familiarity. He knew this was the wealthiest country in the world, and the contrast with his homeland was immediately obvious in every direction. The Academy's campus director was there to receive them, and informed the group that he would personally accompany them throughout their visit to the Divine Weapon Academy. Bai Yi already knew that this academy was where his enemy had graduated from. Running the timeline in his head, he figured his enemy should still be enrolled here. He could barely wait. Sometime later, the students were introduced to the statue of Cadmus Thebes, one of the 5 creator gods of this world. For many, Cadmus Thebes was practically an idol, as the Thebes family currently sat at the very top of the power structure in the country. Their reputation was immense, considered uniquely special for carrying a direct bloodline connection to a deity. The campus director explained that Cadmus Thebes had been the one to bring down a demonic dragon in the distant past, and had subsequently founded both the Guild of Gods and the Academy itself. The Divine Soldiers Academy was the most prestigious institution of its kind in the world. Being selected to visit it was a genuine privilege, but the expectations placed on those who entered were equally serious. Beyond needing to achieve at minimum rank B, candidates also had to clear an admission exam that most people never came close to passing. For some awakened individuals, reaching rank B was the work of an entire lifetime, which made it one of the hardest thresholds in existence. Those who managed to reach that level while still young were considered rare enough to be celebrated as geniuses. Bai Yi knew all of this already, and yet his enemy had graduated from this academy, which meant the man's strength was not something to take lightly. In the past, the individual known as Chris had been brought into Bai Yi's team as a new member. The person who had integrated Chris into the squad had introduced him as the academy's top graduate of his year, which was exactly why Bai Yi believed his enemy was still somewhere inside these walls, still studying. And to stand any chance of facing him, Bai Yi needed to reach rank B as soon as possible. Not for prestige, not for recognition, purely to be strong enough to carry out his revenge. Kai Yin, watching her colleague's focused expression, quietly concluded that if Bai Yi was aiming to enter this academy, then so was she, because she had no intention of falling further behind. At that moment, a man approached her and asked why she hadn't come to see her father yet since arriving in the Divine Realm. Kai Yin looked up in surprise, visibly caught off guard. The student reception official greeted the man respectfully, identifying him as Secretary General Chen. Chen then informed Kai Yin that her father had fallen ill, overworked himself, and hadn't wanted anyone to worry. But he believed she should see him as soon as possible. Kai Yin didn't hesitate, she immediately arranged transportation. The students who didn't know her well began quietly wondering which family she actually belonged to. Shortly after, a sleek limousine pulled up nearby, prompting more than a few of the visiting students to wonder if everyone in this country just rolled around in vehicles like that. A group of academy students stepped out. The director immediately expressed his displeasure at their tardiness. One of the students explained that as students of the East Territory's Supreme Private Academy, their nights were spent running monster layers, and after a particularly intense session, they had simply overslept. The director clarified for everyone's benefit that this training journey was a cross-country, multi-school program, and the students who had just arrived were locals from the Shanj Kingdom. The visiting students looked on with visible awe. That awe, however, was entirely one-sided. The newly arrived students barely acknowledged the visitors existed. Their group leader declared outright that anyone present must be from common, undistinguished families and therefore not worth their time. Upon hearing that, the visiting students shifted uncomfortably. Even Professor Huang visibly felt the attitude was excessive. The leader of the senior students doubled down, calling the visitors a bunch of bumpkins without missing a beat. He explained that unlike them, he and his group came from noble families of the Shanj Kingdom, which meant the resources they had access to were in an entirely different category. He added that their private school had only 5 students and the institution invested everything into those 5, something he claimed ordinary students simply couldn't comprehend because they weren't privileged. And unlike these bumpkins, he was going to enter the Divine Weapon Academy, that was a given. He pointed out that he was only in his 2nd year of high school and his level was already approaching rank B. Because of that, he and his group had been invited to tour the academy ahead of time. He then questioned why bumpkins were on the same excursion. One of He Li's allies wasn't having it and stated clearly that their group was perfectly capable of competing with anyone. The leader looked unimpressed and responded that his group had just flawlessly cleared a rank D dungeon. He questioned exactly how they expected to compete with that. One of his allies added that commoners had no business setting foot in dungeons at that level. And arguing about it was pointless, people like them simply didn't speak the same language as nobles. She continued, nobles were trained from birth to lead and occupy positions of power, everyone else existed to serve those above them. Simple hierarchy. Bai Yi, standing quietly through all of this, thought about the title of Divine Blessed, the highest social standing an ordinary person could reach. Without belonging to a divine bloodline, he had earned that title in his past life, and he had concluded it was worthless because in the end, the gods he had devoted himself to had abandoned him without hesitation. Then something cut through the noise, a flying object closing in at speed. Several students immediately recognized it as exclusive divine race transport. Everyone began wondering what members of the divine race would be doing here right now. A man stepped out and observed casually that it appeared all the students had gathered. The shock that followed was immediate because everyone recognized who they were looking at. Lin Feng, of the renowned Thebes family. The first thing Lin Feng did upon landing was ask if Bai Yi was among the students present. The arrogant students exchanged confused glances. Who exactly was this Bai Yi? The protagonist said nothing. But Lin Feng already knew exactly who he was looking for. He knew Bai Yi had solo cleared a rank D dungeon during the simulation test, and he had been wanting to meet him ever since. He added that the Thebes family had been deeply impressed by the young man's performance. Lin Feng then extended a personal invitation. The family was organizing a hunting competition and Bai Yi was invited as a special guest. The arrogant students stood there in complete, stunned silence. Without further ceremony, Lin Feng asked Bai Yi to come with him immediately. 100 years ago, this world had been plunged into chaos. Demonic monsters of overwhelming power had emerged without warning. 5 powerful deities descended and answered the call, protecting humanity and systematically eradicating the most dangerous creatures. Through divine intervention, the human world survived what should have been its end. Since then, humanity had built a deep and genuine faith around these deities. The gods remained in this world, sharing knowledge and granting power. They established new laws, formed armies capable of standing against the demonic tide, and gave humanity the tools to defend itself. They also took human companions and produced offspring, giving rise to the divine race, a bloodline that was neither fully human nor fully divine. Everyone knew this history. It was taught from childhood, woven into every culture and institution, but Bai Yi no longer trusted any of it. He had lived through what that system actually looked like from the inside. He stayed indifferent while the other students jostled for position, arguing that they deserved to accompany Lin Feng because they were anything but commoners. Lin Feng clarified this event had been organized by the Thebes family, and on this occasion all classmates were welcome. Anyone who wanted to attend the hunt was free to come. Bai Yi's classmates could barely believe it, an invitation to the divine race's territory, a place restricted to nobles under normal circumstances. This was not the kind of opportunity that came twice. With the group assembled, Lin Feng confirmed they would travel together. The Thebes family's territory was, in fact, a high-tech floating city, its residents moving through the air in flying vehicles as casually as anyone else would take a walk. The 5 divine families were spread across different regions of the world, with the Shanj nation being predominantly under the Thebes family's domain. Every member was a descendant of Cadmus Thebes, and together they commanded the most powerful military force in existence, the Guild of Gods. They also administered the Divine Weapon Academy, which meant the entire process of selecting and managing the world's armies ran through them. The awakened academies spread across every country fell under their jurisdiction as well. Bai Yi figured his performance in the graduation exam had put him on their radar, but he still couldn't pin down why the hunting competition specifically had come with a personal invitation. Lin Feng led the group through the location, and the other students were completely absorbed by what they were seeing, the sheer scale of it. Bai Yi, for his part, thought simply he was back. This wasn't his first time here, even if no one else knew that. Shortly after, a servant announced visitors for Shin Thebes first in the line of succession. Shin Thebes appeared to be contemplating something, art and ruins. His grandfather had believed that art was the only real evidence of human existence. His father, the king, held that ruins were the true proof. Shin himself had landed somewhere different. He believed that the truest form of art was the act of creating ruins. Some of the students had no idea what to make of that. The leader of the arrogant group quickly instructed everyone to bow, telling them that only the ignorant would hold their gaze before someone of divine lineage. The protagonist kept his head up. He recognized exactly who was standing before him, the eldest son of the deity who governed this world, and he felt no urge to lower his eyes. After the introduction, Lin Feng moved the group on to the next location, the hunting grounds. The scale of the creatures inhabiting the space left most of the students genuinely stunned. Meanwhile, Ayad observed from above and asked his brother Ali Ayad how many participants they were expecting this year. Ali Ayad replied that the announcement was coming shortly. The two weren't the only nobles watching, others had gathered as well, including a girl named Alice Jin. The protagonist recognized all 3 of them immediately. The twins, Ayad and Ali Ayad, were grandsons of the Ayad family. Alice Jin was a granddaughter of the Jin family. That meant representatives from 3 divine families were currently present and watching. All of them observing. Lin Feng announced that the competition would be starting soon and moved through the rules so everyone was clear. The hunting competition took place across this massive enclosed area, the core of it being direct confrontation between awakened participants and magical monsters. All monsters were rank C, captured from across the world and held by the Divine Guild specifically for this event. The participants were volunteers from various regions. To keep it a fair challenge, only awakened individuals below rank B were eligible to enter, which meant the students understood that the people competing were operating in roughly the same power range as them. Though unlike the students, the regular volunteers carried significantly more battle-hardened experience. Lin Feng then announced that this year's hunting competition happened to coincide with the festival day, and because of that, the Thebes family had prepared rewards that were far more generous than usual for the eventual winner. He invited all participants to enter the arena. Lin Feng then stated the total number of participants for this year, 12, including Lui from the Shanj Kingdom and Lin Qing from the Nai Kingdom. The younger students assumed these veterans must be carrying serious combat experience. Feeling the weight of the gap in front of them, but also the weight of what was being offered as a reward, some of them decided the risk might be worth taking anyway. The protagonist was the only one in the group who showed zero hesitation. At that moment, Shin Thebes turned his attention directly to the protagonist and identified him as Bai Yi. He stated that he was aware Bai Yi had cleared a rank D dungeon single-handedly, but he suspected the young man was capable of considerably more than that. He then challenged Bai Yi directly to defeat one of the rank C monsters in front of everyone. The more privileged students considered this borderline insane, sending a student alone against a monster of that caliber. But when the order came from a divine descendant, it wasn't really a question. Meanwhile, He Li was already thinking ahead. Bai Yi hadn't been invited here without reason. The Thebes family had intended to test him from the very beginning. For his part, Bai Yi responded that facing a single monster wasn't going to cut it. Since he was already there, he wanted to enter the full competition. Shin Thebes kept his expression neutral, but the request had caught him off guard. He wasn't the only one. Every person in the room had the same reaction. Even the nobles watching from their positions were taken aback, because you simply didn't see this kind of audacity often. Bai Yi's reasoning was straightforward. Rank C monsters were extremely rare in the outside world. Having access to this many of them in one place was an opportunity he wasn't going to pass up. His goal was rank B, and the only way to get there was to keep pushing himself against things that could actually challenge him. Beyond that, 3 divine families were present and watching. If he was going to be seen, he might as well make it worth their time. He Li then spoke up and stated that she also wanted to enter the hunt. If there were still spots available, the vice captain followed immediately with the same request. The arrogant students watched this unfold with barely concealed shock again. Shin Thebes pointed out that since all 3 were below rank B, they technically met the entry requirements. He noted that it was the first time ordinary students had ever requested to join the competition. He found that genuinely interesting and approved it. One of the arrogant students immediately scoffed, said these commoners were just performing for the Divine Guild and wouldn't last long enough to matter. The group leader, feeling the spotlight shifting, announced that he would also be entering. Lin Feng paused and advised him to think carefully. There were no teleportation devices permitted inside the competition grounds, meaning if things went badly, nobody was coming to pull him out. Despite the obvious fear creeping into his expression, the leader wasn't willing to be shown up. He agreed to enter. He told himself that even without winning, he couldn't possibly perform worse than a group of commoners. With all the additions, the total participant count had grown by 8, the 5 from the private academy, plus the 3 from the Jian Kingdom. From their elevated viewing positions, the nobles agreed things had gotten considerably more interesting. The Jin family's grandson asked the twins who they were putting their money on. Both brothers immediately placed 1 million each on the 5 from the private academy. They declared that nobles of that caliber simply didn't lose to commoners. Shin Thebes spoke next and placed his bet on Bai Yi. The twins stared at him. Were they hearing this correctly? They were convinced the prince was simply throwing his money away on the wrong candidate. The Jin family's grandson sat back and considered his own position. Lin Feng suddenly realized he had neglected to pass on an important warning to the new participants, that approaching the central region of the Black Forest was strictly forbidden under any circumstances. He decided not to worry too much about it, though. The odds of any of them actually making it that far were slim. With the competition underway, participants spread out across the field. Drones tracked everything happening inside in real time. Once the groups had put some distance between themselves, one of the girls from the arrogant group started trembling, declaring that she had never encountered danger quite like this. Their group leader told everyone to stay calm. They had faced monsters before, and this wasn't going to be fundamentally different. Rank C monsters weren't dramatically stronger than a dungeon boss. If they worked together, their odds were decent. And this was their chance to prove once and for all that those commoners had no business being in the same bracket as them. Sometime later, the protagonist's group was moving through the field when Bai Yi felt something odd. His heartbeat was accelerating and he had no rational explanation for it. He Li glanced over and asked if he was all right. He told her yes, keeping his unease off his face so as not to alarm anyone. The vice captain suggested sticking to a team strategy. The numbers gave them a better chance. He mentioned that ever since Bai Yi had turned down the school guild's offer, their leader had been losing sleep over it. So she was especially motivated to make this cooperation work. Either way, the vice captain figured there was nothing to lose by working together. Meanwhile, a lurking monster blindsided the other group entirely. Calivan, the leader of the arrogant students, was caught completely off guard. He realized immediately that the monster had been reading their movements before it struck. Calivan's group found themselves with zero control over the situation, but one of the group members didn't freeze. They drew their sword and drove it into the creature, drawing first blood. The group's mage followed up with an ice attack, pushing the monster back and freezing it in place. Suddenly it was exposed and wide open. The group's archer lined up her shot and, as she released, the others rushed in with close-range attacks, committing everything to bring it down. Calivan launched a fireball to close it out. Confident the creature had no way to avoid it, the fireball connected, and the monster erupted from the combined impact, fragmenting under the force of the blast. Calivan immediately celebrated, declaring this their first victory, proof of what an elite group was actually capable of. His team joined the celebration, though the points had credited solely to the leader. Calivan announced the new plan: he would take point and handle the monsters while his teammates covered the flanks. The group's mage, however, had just noticed something that killed the mood immediately. In the overall ranking, the protagonist's group had already taken down more than 10 monsters and was sitting at the top. The mage couldn't process it. They had just finished their first kill and the others were already lapping them in the rankings. Even their group leader couldn't see a realistic path to closing that gap. And it wasn't just him, the nobles watching were also unsettled. The twins, who had placed their money on the group of 5, were starting to refer to their chosen candidates as a useless bunch. They genuinely could not wrap their heads around losing to a team of commoners. They settled on luck as the explanation. Then noticed that the prince had randomly selected the third-ranked participant to watch. Shin Thebes responded that luck had nothing to do with it. His father had always taught him never to underestimate what appeared weak. The chubby one, who still hadn't placed a bet, leaned back and questioned aloud whether this hunt was easier than usual. At this rate, it wasn't going to be very entertaining. Shin Thebes asked what outlandish idea the Jin family's grandson had brewing this time. The grandson announced that he would bet on himself because he was also joining the hunt. But he clarified that he wouldn't be dirtying his own hands, he was sending his dog in to compete for him. One of the twins pointed out that the dog in question was a divinely blessed creature, and according to the competition rules, only those below rank B were permitted to participate. However, the chubby man shrugged it off and pointed out that the Divine Guild made the rules. He then proposed they take it a step further and release some of the high-level monsters that were currently imprisoned. If his dog couldn't take first place with that kind of help, then the consequences would fall on him. It didn't take long before the stronger monsters began appearing in the arena, and the first participants to encounter them were caught completely flat-footed. They hadn't anticipated anything close to this. One participant immediately called to withdraw from the competition. But as had been clearly stated beforehand, there was no rescue available for anyone inside the hunting grounds. Several participants were eliminated as the competition continued. Everyone who had agreed to enter had done so knowing the risk was theirs alone to carry. That reality didn't stop those on the outside from growing anxious about what they were watching, Professor Huang chief among them. She couldn't stop thinking about the protagonist. The nobles, by contrast, showed zero concern. To them, this was entertainment. The twins were practically applauding. They agreed that the competition had finally gotten interesting. They turned to Thebes and asked if he had any more monsters in reserve. The prince said nothing. He simply continued watching everything with careful, measuring eyes. Back with the protagonist's group, Li was locked in with a stone monster, using her speed to stay out of its reach, while the vice captain kept it distracted from another angle. Bai Yi spotted the opening and drove the creature back with a kick. The monster wasn't down yet, but it was losing ground, forced into a disadvantageous position by the vice captain's ability, using the space that had just opened up. Bai Yi pressed the attack, and the monster went down for good. Li noted quietly that this was the third time Bai Yi had been the one to close it out, even though they were supposedly fighting as a team. In practice, he was the one running the show, and he was doing it on a single class. Li suspected he was deliberately holding back, not wanting to reveal his full range to the cameras watching everything. Bai Yi, for his part, was pleased with his own rate of growth. Accepting the challenge had been the right call. At the pace he was climbing, rank B wasn't a distant goal anymore. But he had to be careful. Too much visibility meant too many eyes on abilities he wasn't ready to expose publicly. He needed room to move without every drone in the arena tracking him. The mist forest up ahead looked exactly like the kind of space he was looking for. The question was convincing the rest of the team to let him go in or at least not follow. The vice captain ran through their current standing, they were at the top of the ranking and performing well. He pointed out that 4th place was falling further behind by the minute. The gap was only getting wider. But Lee had clocked something her companion hadn't. She flagged it. One competitor was climbing the ranks at an alarming rate. Bai recognized the name immediately, Ganix. What he couldn't figure out was why Ganix was in this competition at all. He watched the feed. Ganix was dismantling powerful monsters entirely on his own. Ganix was a divine blessed, a rank B cloud-type warrior. That classification gave him a natural edge against nearly every monster category in the arena. The fact that he was operating as a subordinate of the Jin family did nothing to diminish the sheer weight of what he brought to the field. In a very short window of time, Ganix had climbed to 3rd place in the rankings, surpassing the protagonist. The chubby observer celebrated loudly. Ganix had passed Thebes' candidate. He declared that the prince had clearly bet on the wrong person and was about to lose. One of the twins argued that fielding a divine blessed in this competition was flat-out cheating. The other twin, however, chose to enjoy the moment. Thebes had never lost a bet before today, and they were happy to finally witness it. The prince didn't react. He stated simply that he had no intention of changing who he was backing. He raised his bet by 100 million and invited the others to match it if they dared. The twins erupted. That was the equivalent of an entire week's contribution. The number was completely unhinged. The chubby man, in contrast, declared that Ganix was the most reliable hunting dog he had ever trained and raised his own bet on Ganix accordingly. Following that exchange, Thebes announced he would be adding something to increase the participants' motivation. Extra time was being added to the competition. With that, the official announcement came. The final phase of the hunting competition was beginning immediately. More monsters would be released into the arena and participants could choose at that point whether to continue or step out. One of the younger participants declared her withdrawal without hesitation. Then a drone broadcasted the update. The Thebes family had added a new prize for the winner. A special item, the Sacred Oracle. Bai knew exactly what that was. A ring that each member of the Divine Guild could bestow only once in their entire lifetime. And for an ordinary person, possessing one was equivalent to having a guaranteed shield against any consequence. Even a capital crime could be absolved through the Sacred Oracle. In his past life, Bai had been saved by his master using one of those exact rings. So the fact that the Thebes family was putting it on the table as a competition prize caught him genuinely off guard. He concluded the competition was about to get considerably more serious, which meant he needed to start climbing the rankings more aggressively. The vice captain analyzed the situation. Team play had a higher success rate, but the pace of point accumulation was slow and the available monster count was dropping. He suggested they split up and fight independently from that point forward, otherwise all 3 of them risked being overtaken by the newcomer. Bai asked if his 2 companions could hold their own if they separated. Lee caught what was underneath the question. Bai had been staying with the team primarily because he was concerned about their safety. She told him not to worry about it and made clear she wasn't going to be underestimated. She was also competing for 1st place. On the other side of the arena, Ganix was pushing hard. He knew exactly what losing this competition would cost him. From a private observation box, his master watched with satisfaction. He had created a hunting dog without equal, and he was certain that no candidate of the princes would come close to matching him, especially now that Bai's teammates had separated from him. But immediately after that thought, Bai walked up to one of the drones, and the feed cut out. The prince sat forward slightly. It was not something anyone had expected. But Thebes had already formed his suspicion. Bai was done holding back. That was why he had removed himself from the cameras. The prince had been watching Bai since he arrived and had noticed that the young man was deliberately heading deeper into the forest toward the central area that most participants steered clear of entirely. Bai moved with his master's old lessons running through his head. The forest's most powerful monsters preferred concealment. To find the creatures that gave the most experience, you had to enter the enemy's territory, not wait at the edges. Now that he was here with no cameras and no audience, this was exactly the time to go all out. Outside the arena, the students who had withdrawn were tracking the competition from a screen. They noticed Bai's feed had gone dark and some began to worry. Professor Huang was particularly anxious. Her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Then one of the students pointed at the ranking board. Bai had just jumped 30 points in one update, vaulting to 2nd place. If he kept that pace, 1st place wasn't far off at all. When that registered, the chubby man looked like he had been slapped. He refused to accept that his subordinate's score had been surpassed and immediately suggested a system error. But Lin Feng shut that down. Chips were embedded in every monster, and the moment one was defeated, the points transferred automatically to whoever made the kill. The system didn't make errors like that. Annoyed, the chubby man threw his drink in Lin Feng's direction and told him he didn't need a breakdown on something he already knew. He also added that even as a blessed, Lin Feng didn't have the right to interrupt a noble mid-sentence. Thebes simply commented that the chubby man was afraid of losing, and quietly concluded that Bai Yi was a great deal more interesting than he had initially given him credit for. Inside the arena, Li observed that exactly as she had predicted, the moment Bai Yi started fighting alone, he had surged ahead of everyone. Even knowing he was hiding his true power, she had no intention of being left in the dust. Meanwhile, the vice captain had been watching Bai Yi's progress update in real time and couldn't understand how someone could climb the rankings at that speed. He started putting it together. Bai Yi had been holding back this whole time, and now that he was alone, he was showing the Divine Guild what he was actually capable of. The vice captain also reasoned that the most dangerous part of the forest would logically contain the most valuable monsters, and that was almost certainly where Bai Yi had gone. He decided it was worth making his own move toward the central area, reasoning that as long as he kept his distance from the Black Mist Forest itself, the risk was manageable. Bai Yi, however, was already deep in the heart of the Black Mist Forest. On the way in, he had cleared nearly every monster in his path, and as a direct result of that, his skills had grown at a pace that surprised even him. He was now seriously entertaining the possibility of reaching rank B before he even left the hunting grounds. On top of that, he had formed contracts with 2 more monsters along the way. One of them was Shaolin, useful for detecting nearby presences. The other was King Kong, a heavyweight fighter built for direct combat. He asked Shaolin to run a scan on the surrounding environment, and immediately the unease that had been building since he entered the forest came rushing back. He was very close to something dangerous. He could feel it. Something was pulling at him. He reflected that in the past, the demon who had made a pact with him had sent him back in time as a gift, but gifts from demons didn't come without a price attached. On that day, the demon had told him clearly when the time came, Bai Yi would be expected to pay what he owed. Standing here now, Bai Yi had a feeling that the time was arriving. Elsewhere, Professor Huang was studying the ranking board and saw Bai Yi sitting in first place. She noted almost to herself that 3 of the top 4 were from her school. She genuinely hadn't expected that outcome. Others watching shared her surprise. But Bai Yi's feed was still dark. They couldn't follow what he was actually doing. The students started speculating that he had pushed into the central region of the arena. The hunting ground was divided into 3 distinct sections: the basic area, the central area, and the core known as the Black Mist Forest. Most participants stuck to the basic area. The monsters were weaker there, and the points reflected that. The ones sitting higher in the rankings had ventured into the central area, which explained the gap in their scores. So if Bai Yi was ahead of all of them, the logical conclusion was that he had gone even further, all the way into the forest's core. The problem being that everyone knew that area was off-limits. The rumors around it described it as cursed. Bai Yi's position remained unknown, but the vice captain's was visible to everyone. He was clearly walking straight into the forbidden forest. The vice captain, for his part, had only just realized he had accidentally crossed into the restricted zone. He had intended to stay in the central area, but the central area had been completely empty of monsters. Looking around, he spotted Bai Yi further ahead, navigating the same environment. He wondered if Bai Yi had any idea what he was walking into. Still, the vice captain's mind went somewhere he wasn't proud of. He began to think that if Bai Yi simply disappeared in a place like this, the divine family's attention would naturally redirect itself toward others, people like him. While the vice captain sat with that thought, Bai Yi pressed even deeper into the Black Mist Forest. Then he stopped. He had just found one of his own trail markings. Something was wrong. He had been walking in a straight line and he was back where he started. Illusory labyrinth, that was his immediate conclusion. And beyond that, he could tell from what he was seeing that he wasn't the first person to have gotten lost here. Someone had cast a spell on this location at some point in the past, which meant the dangers of this place went well beyond what was visible on the surface. What Bai Yi couldn't figure out was who could have been responsible for something like that, which, if anything, only deepened his determination to find out what was really hidden in here. Back outside, someone noticed that Bai Yi's score had stopped moving while Ganix continued climbing, eventually taking first place. Shortly after, the vice captain appeared near He Li. She immediately asked if he had found Bai Yi. The vice captain told her he had spotted Bai Yi in the central area and watched him walk deeper into the forest. He Li then asked whether Bai Yi might have accidentally entered the Black Mist Forest. Then Bai Yi's signal dropped completely. He had vanished from the competition system. The students tracking the ranking were alarmed. He had disappeared from everything. Professor Huang immediately feared the worst. She held on to the hope that she was wrong. But the fear was already there. Inside the Black Mist Forest, Bai Yi made a decision. He closed his eyes. He wasn't going to trust anything his senses were showing him, not in here. He would follow instinct alone, the rhythm of his own heartbeat. And slowly, step by step, he began drawing closer to the edge of the forest. When he finally opened his eyes, he was standing at the lip of a massive abyss. He hadn't expected this. There was no record of anything like this in his past life, no mention of an abyss at the center of the forbidden forest. But his instincts told him the floating city was hiding something at the bottom of it, something deliberate. So together with his contracted ally, he decided to find out what was down there. Bai Yi reached the bottom of the abyss and stood there trying to make sense of what he was looking at. The only thing he could conclude was that this was the aftermath of something enormous, a battle long finished. Then, without warning, a spirit materialized at the location, and it was a boss-class entity, immediately summoning allied spirits around it. It demanded to know how anyone had dared to invade its territory and declared that trespassers would receive no mercy. He Li had been following Bai Yi's trail and found monsters already defeated by him along the way, clear confirmation that he had entered the forbidden forest. She noted that none of the defeated creatures appeared to have given him any real trouble, which had probably only encouraged him to keep going. The vice captain, for his part, had quietly decided it was better to return to the hunt. He had already concluded that Bai Yi was unlikely to make it out alive. He Li refused to accept that conclusion. She was going in after him. She felt responsible. She should have warned him about what the Black Mist Forest actually was before any of this happened. That guilt drove her forward. The vice captain tried to talk her out of it, but a separate thought was forming in his mind at the same time. Less competition was better, fewer people standing between him and the attention of the divine families. He Li walked into the forbidden forest. The chubby observer watched and declared the girl must have lost her mind entirely. But then he decided it was actually perfect. His direct competitors were walking voluntarily toward their own deaths. There was simply no way his dog was losing this competition now. Victory was already his. The twins discussed quietly what exactly was in that forest and why the cursed reputation had stuck around for so long. But they also recognized that the competition was approaching its end, and whatever was in there would stop mattering soon enough. Inside the hunting grounds, the survivors were doing exactly that, surviving. One girl was receiving field treatment for her injuries. An ally urged her to hold on. Midnight would come, the competition would close, and they could finally leave. Calivan muttered that even though the organizers had technically given everyone the option to withdraw, no actual exit had been made available. He said they were lucky to have found an empty corner to hide in, otherwise they wouldn't have lasted much longer. At this point, the ranking and the prize meant nothing to him. He just wanted out. He reminded himself that unlike these commoners, their lives had actual value, which was exactly why surviving until the end of the competition timer mattered. Then came the announcement: the final stage had concluded. They immediately assumed it was over, they could leave. And then the organizers announced that the bonus stage was beginning, and the final boss was being released. Upon hearing that, what little composure the arrogant group had left evaporated entirely. Then the ground started shaking. Several of them broke down completely. They had stopped caring about points or prizes a long time ago. All they wanted was to walk out of there alive. Calivan exploded with fury and demanded they be allowed to leave immediately. He made it clear that not one person in his group cared about the competition anymore. Survival was the only priority. After all, they came from noble families and deserved to be treated accordingly. Then Calivan was hit without any warning. The attack came out of nowhere. It took him down instantly, draining his energy completely. The final boss had arrived. His group watched in horror as their leader went down. And the realization hit them: they could be next. A rank B boss was standing right in front of them. Even a coordinated group attack wasn't going to be enough against something at that level. Far away from all of that, Bai was also in the middle of his own fight against a genuinely dangerous monster. Unlike the group cowering in a corner, he was facing a full legion of enemies alone. He reflected on what the competition had given him. His overall levels had gone up, his combat classes had gotten stronger. But only one class had seen a truly significant attribute increase. He still didn't believe he was ready to take down a rank B monster cleanly. His advantage was that he wasn't limited to one approach. He decided to play his trump card, switching classes mid-fight, layering different attributes together to exploit openings the enemy couldn't anticipate. But the enemy's raw power was in a different bracket from what he had been dealing with, even with multiple classes in rotation. Bai found himself consistently on the back foot against this level of opposition. He didn't stop. He kept looking for the weak point because he was certain one existed. Every enemy had one. He used distraction to create the opening, drawing the monster's attention while King Kong came in from behind to strike the exact spot he had been targeting. The hit landed, the weak point was exposed, and the monster's defenses cracked, leaving it open to a finishing attack. Bai closed the gap in power that had been holding him back, and with one decisive strike he ended it. It had been brutal and it had been close, but he won. His general attributes received a significant boost as a reward. But the path wasn't clear yet, because directly ahead of him was a locked gate, and on the other side of it he felt something pulling at him. He needed to know what was there. Then he noticed its stellar element energy building up within him. A new class was about to awaken. Meanwhile, outside in the floating city, some members of the divine class were trading rumors about the secret supposedly hidden within the celestial city. One of them had heard that inside the central tower there was a dungeon housing countless imprisoned monsters. His companion dismissed it outright. Something like that existing inside a floating city made no logical sense. Their conversation was cut short when the squad captain reprimanded them both for talking out of turn. He snapped at them, gossiping like that was strictly off-limits, and the two soldiers flinched hard the moment the reprimand landed. The captain reminded them that their job was to protect the city's eastern sector, and with the hunting competition in full swing, screwing up was simply not an option. He then twisted the knife further. 3 years in the squad, and these two still had less common sense than a fresh recruit. His advice: take notes from their colleague Chris. Because Chris apparently was everything a soldier should be. Meanwhile, back to our guy, he had just awakened a brand new class. The Star Red Mage? Yeah, that just happened. And while the new power was definitely appreciated, it didn't take long before that familiar, unsettling feeling crept back in. And it wasn't fading, it was getting stronger by the second. Bai pinpointed it immediately. Whatever was causing that feeling, it was coming from beyond the gate. So naturally, he decided to open it. He broke through the chains, sealing the entrance, and pushed his way inside. But the moment he stepped through, he was met with even more chains, and that's when it clicked. Something seriously important was locked up in here. Magical chains bound a man from every angle, and magical padlocks sealed every single link. Whoever designed this prison was not playing around. Escape wasn't just unlikely, it was practically impossible. The prisoner noticed Bai's presence and wasted no time. He asked with a sharp edge in his voice whether this young man had been sent to humiliate him. Bai didn't flinch. He just asked calmly, was this man Samuel? That caught the prisoner off guard. He demanded to know how this kid even knew his name. And Bai, cool as ever, he simply said he was there to save him. The prisoner was speechless. Genuinely could not find a single word after hearing that. Then, out of nowhere, the door leading into the chamber slammed shut on its own. Bai felt a chill run through him, but there was nothing he could do about it. And then, as if things weren't already bad enough, a sinister aura began bleeding into the surroundings. The enemy warrior lord reappeared, just like that. Bai was confused. He was absolutely certain he had already taken this guy down. But it got worse. 2 more enemies materialized in the area right after. Just like that, the difficulty of this whole situation had tripled. Bai was genuinely stunned. How had so many enemies shown up all at once? He didn't get much time to think about it, though. The enemies weren't the type to wait around, and they attacked immediately. One of them made it loud and clear: anyone who dared invade their territory deserved to be wiped out. Bai knew his situation had just gone from bad to catastrophic, and from behind his chains the prisoner started laughing. He pointed it out with an almost impressed tone. Bai had fought his way in all right, but in doing so he'd managed to grab every single enemy's attention at the same time. Annoyed, Bai cut straight to it and asked what he needed to do to free him. The prisoner fired back. Bai Yi didn't even have the key, so exactly how did he plan on freeing anyone? Bai Yi hadn't even known there was a key, and honestly, that revelation was not encouraging in the slightest. But then his eyes landed on something, one of the enemy's swords. The shape matched the lock perfectly. He put it together fast. That sword was the key. The problem, to get it, he'd have to defeat the guy currently holding it. Which was, to put it lightly, not an outcome he was thrilled about. The prisoner admitted that Bai Yi caught on quickly, but followed it up by calling him arrogant for thinking he could actually pull this off. After all, how was someone who could barely protect himself supposed to free anyone else? Bai Yi laid it out plainly. The divine race didn't organize this hunting competition for fun, blocking access to this area, banning rank B awakened and above from participating. It was all deliberate. Their calculation was simple. A class C or lower awakened would never find this place, and even if they did, they'd never make it out alive. Hearing that, the prisoner remarked that Bai Yi seemed to have already made peace with his fate, but Bai Yi shut that down immediately. He wasn't giving up, not now. Instead, he proposed a bet. If he managed to free the prisoner, then the prisoner would have to obey him forever. And he asked directly, did Demon King Samuel agree to those terms? Samuel studied the boy in front of him. Despite everything, the chains, the enemies, the impossible odds, this kid showed absolutely no fear. And so, Samuel made his declaration. If Bai Yi truly managed to free him, he would accept whatever conditions were placed on him. The fight kicked off, and one of the enemies wasted no time unleashing their power. Their sword came down hard, and the impact sent a massive explosion tearing through the area. These weren't light attacks either. The enemy was pouring a serious amount of energy into every single strike, giving Bai Yi absolutely no room to breathe, let alone react. Cornered and out of options, Bai Yi had no choice but to call on his ally. King Kong stepped in, throwing himself between the protagonist and an attack that would have ended things right there. Watching from the sidelines, Samuel was beginning to put the pieces together. The boy was a dual-class human. Rare, but even so, Samuel knew the reality of this fight. Bai Yi was up against an army of dead souls, a battle that would have been brutal even for Samuel himself. And honestly, it made sense. A prison built to hold a demon king would naturally come with a defense force to match. You don't just slap a padlock on that door and call it a day. Bai Yi was getting a very direct lesson in just how serious that defense force was. He was practically being pushed around the battlefield, forced to engage enemies he'd rather avoid entirely. And attacking, that was almost off the table. He was stuck in full defensive mode, just trying to stay standing. Bai Yi quickly clocked something alarming about the enemy. Beyond just their raw strength, they had mastered an advanced technique called matter perception, which put him at a serious disadvantage. They could read his moves before he made them. He ran the numbers in his head. Even sitting at the top of rank C, taking on this many B-class enemies simultaneously was a completely unreasonable ask. So he shifted strategies, stop just blocking, start moving, because even with his guard up, he was still eating damage. Standing still was just a slower way to lose. And the toll was already showing. Bai Yi was running on fumes. His reaction speed was dropping, which meant he was leaving more and more openings for the enemy to exploit. King Kong laid him out again, but watching his ally take hit after hit, Bai Yi made a hard call. He ordered King Kong to fall back, protect the summon, pull him out of the line of fire. But in doing so, he just removed his biggest asset from the fight. And now his options had basically dried up. Bai Yi wasn't deluding himself. These enemies were operating on a completely different level. Just to take down one of the warriors, he had burned through everything he had. And now he was staring down 10 warriors and a general. Samuel, watching all of this, stated it plainly: against absolute power, the weak simply have no hope. But Bai Yi pushed back. He argued that this battle wasn't just about raw strength in the end. The one with the better strategy would walk away the winner. With that, he gave the order, his bird go. The winged ally launched a volley of projectiles from a distance, hammering the smaller enemies as they scrambled to shield their master. Bai Yi immediately called the next move. While his bird kept the smaller warriors occupied, he personally broke toward the general. Closing the gap, he unleashed an ice strike. And he caught something in that moment, a flicker of hesitation in the enemy's movements. The general's full focus had shifted to dealing with the ice, which left him exposed if only for a split second. But Bai Yi didn't go for the kill. He had one goal: disarm the general and take that sword. The general realized his sword was gone and immediately lunged to get it back. But Bai Yi had already pulled the key out of reach before the general could recover. He sent the sword flying toward the lock, using it for exactly what it was meant for. Then he called King Kong back in, ordering him to drive the key home. But the summon couldn't get there in time. The general was faster. He snatched the key right back before King Kong could reach it. Bai Yi couldn't believe it. The plan had failed, and before he could regroup, the general turned on King Kong. This time, King Kong had nothing left to defend with. The summon was eliminated. One less target for the general to worry about. He declared it with cold finality. Beneath the abyss, the greatest despair was closing in. Watching his summoned creature get wiped out like that, Bai Yi felt completely powerless. One less ally, one less option. Samuel didn't hold back his assessment. The young man had underestimated his enemies and now he was paying for it. He added that these undead weren't anything like the beasts Bai Yi had faced before. These were the souls of the Demon King's ancient servants. Every single one of them had been Samuel's subordinates in life. And in death, they had been repurposed as the prison's defense mechanism. Bai Yi was completely on the back foot now. The only thing he could do was keep moving, dodge, evade, don't get hit. It was the only play he had left. Attacking them would just burn energy he couldn't afford to waste. But even backed into a corner like this, Bai Yi refused to fold. He stayed sharp, watching for any opening he could find, but his attacks weren't landing the way he needed them to. Samuel acknowledged the young man's skill. He wasn't blind to it, but he also saw the ceiling. Bai Yi's class had been pushed as far as it could go. Still, he conceded. For a human with limited power, Bai Yi was genuinely one of the best he'd ever seen. But even so, he stated the brutal truth: the young man was alone against a powerful army, and no amount of skill could bridge that gap. And in that moment, Bai Yi's mind went somewhere else entirely. He thought about the team he once had, and how now he didn't need one. A flashback pulled him back to the Divine Guild's headquarters. Bai Yi had made it clear back then he wasn't built for raiding with other people. His master called him out on it. Said Bai Yi acted that way because he thought he was better than everyone else and that a team would only drag him down. Bai Yi denied it, said he just wasn't great with people, that's all. His master wasn't buying it for a second. He told Bai Yi straight he was just making excuses. Bai Yi fired back that his master wasn't exactly a fair example to use, since getting along with him was literally part of the job. But his master revealed something unexpected. He'd personally handpicked an elite squad for Bai Yi to lead. His reasoning was simple. His disciple needed people around him. Bai Yi hadn't believed it would work at first. But after years together, they'd built something real and stayed together until the very end. Back in the present, Bai Yi thought about it. Ever since he'd come back, he had never truly been alone. He carried the weight of his fallen companions with him everywhere. Then he made his move, switching to his newly acquired class. He activated the power of the Star Mage and reshaped the terrain around him. With one move, the entire battlefield tilted in his favor. Bai Yi went on the offensive, channeling every skill his new class had to offer. He used the altered terrain to his advantage, trapping all 10 warriors in place, forcing the battlefield into a single, narrow corridor, where only he and the enemy general could face each other one-on-one. As he closed in, Bai Yi reflected he'd studied enough classes to know exactly how this worked. The general raised his sword to defend, but Bai Yi didn't slow down. He did the opposite. He let the hit land on purpose, and the impact confirmed it. A B-rank general's strike was absolutely devastating. He noted that an opponent could only shatter the ice depending on the weapon they carried. But right now, he had maneuvered the enemy into a position where counterattack was simply impossible. Bai Yi activated his ice power, the same technique as before, only this time it worked. The general was fully trapped. From behind his chains, the prisoner watched the whole thing unfold, and he was genuinely impressed. He'd seen it all. The boy used his terrain to cage the other enemies, leaving only the sword wielder free. Then he turned himself into bait, letting the enemy's weapon hit him deliberately just to close the distance. One man, operating alone, and he was doing it with intelligence. Samuel came to a realization: the boy wasn't just a fighter, he was a one-man army, and now Bai Yi had done it. He had the enemy's sword in hand. The key to freeing the prisoner was finally his. Without hesitating, Bai Yi drove the sword straight into the lock, but the general wasn't just going to sit there and accept it. She declared that she would not allow this to happen. And with a burst of raw strength, she shattered the ice once again. But it was already too late. The sword was in the lock, and the liberation process had already begun. The Demon King stated it himself. The boy had actually done it. The process was already underway. There was no stopping it now. Bai Yi stepped forward and looked the Demon King in the eye, reminding him of the promise he'd made and demanding he hold up his end. And the Demon King moved instantly. He surged forward and seized Bai Yi. At that exact same moment, the general and soldiers had broken free from their restraints, leaving Bai Yi in a very bad position. But Bai Yi didn't flinch. He told the prisoner it was time to honor his end of the deal, and he gave the order. Samuel was to eliminate the entire undead army, right now. Samuel responded that he would have done it anyway, no second request needed. Then the Demon King ignited his power and made one thing very clear: he would not forgive a single traitor. Samuel stepped forward to face his former army, and then he tore through them one by one without hesitation. All that pent-up power finally unleashed. The reanimated soldiers had no answer for it. They were facing someone so far above them that resistance wasn't even a consideration. Samuel wiped out the soldiers in seconds, and once they were dealt with, he turned his attention to the general. He moved Bai Yi out of harm's way first, then brought down the army's leader. Bai Yi watched it all happen and felt only one thing: envy. Samuel's strength was on a completely different level. He could only stand back and observe as Samuel finished the job. Samuel declared that his former soldiers still hadn't grasped the simple truth that they could never defeat him. The remaining soldiers attempted to fight back anyway, but they had no real chance because the opponent standing in front of them was incomparably more powerful than anything they could handle. The Demon King stated the truth plainly: his former allies had made a grave mistake the day they chose to betray him, and now they would regret it. Samuel roared at his former soldiers, calling them ungrateful traitors to their core. He unleashed everything he had on them. Not a single moment of mercy, no room to react. He reminded them this place had been their home. Everything changed the day that group calling themselves the Divine Race showed up with an army. If his soldiers had simply stayed by his side, things would have turned out very differently. But instead of standing firm, they chose to betray their king. Loyal soldiers once reduced to attack dogs for the enemy. Burning with fury, Samuel asked his former allies one final question: was it worth it? The general spoke for the army. They made that choice to survive. There was simply no way to win the war. Samuel rejected that entirely. A reason wasn't the same as an excuse, and either way, it didn't change what they had done. They had betrayed their king. The general didn't argue. He simply asked to be eliminated completely and permanently. But the Demon King refused to grant a traitor's request. He stated that traitors like him didn't deserve a quick end. Instead, he would give them a punishment that actually fit what they had done. And with that, Samuel attacked the general without a shred of mercy. The general begged to be finished off, and eventually that request was granted, but not by who you'd expect. It wasn't the Demon King who delivered the final blow. It was Bai Yi. Samuel turned on him immediately, told him he had no right to interrupt his revenge, and demanded to know exactly who he thought he was. Back in his previous life, the Demon King Belphegor had asked Bai Yi for a very specific favor: to locate the other 6 demon monarchs. Bai Yi had asked who they were. Belphegor explained they were the other demon kings. And when the time came, Bai Yi's new heart would naturally sense the presence of each one of them. Belphegor harbored a deep, burning hatred for the gods, which meant his goal and Bai Yi's aligned perfectly. By freeing the demon monarchs one by one, the protagonist could turn them into allies and build the force needed to bring down the deities who ruled this world. Belphegor had been practically electric with excitement at the mere thought of the plan coming together. He declared that the gods would have no answer for a united assault. Once they fell, the divine race's stranglehold on the world would finally be broken. Back in the present, Bai Yi explained himself. He had demanded that Samuel eliminate the enemies immediately after being freed. That was the condition: take them out clean and fast. Instead, Samuel had decided to draw it out and toy with them. Watching that, Bai Yi felt he had no choice but to step in and end the reanimated spirits himself. Samuel was furious. He made it clear the fact that Bai Yi had freed him did not put them on equal footing. But Bai Yi hit back with a hard truth: Samuel couldn't leave this place on his own. The tower was designed specifically to suppress his powers. So if Samuel wanted to stay locked in here forever, then sure, he could eliminate Bai Yi right now. Even though he clearly hated it, Samuel knew Bai Yi was right. Then Bai Yi asked him something. Did Samuel remember Belphegor? That name hit differently. Samuel's reaction was immediate. Bai Yi then revealed the truth. The reason he was standing here at all was because of a condition Belphegor had placed on him. Samuel was confused. How could a human, just a human, possibly know Belphegor? Bai Yi explained. Belphegor was the reason he was still alive, the one who gave him a new heart. Because of that, he had an agreement to uphold, and step 1 was freeing Samuel. Samuel then asked what came next. Bai's answer was simple: he was going to cause a massive disruption up above. With that settled, the two of them walked out of the imprisonment chamber together. As they reached the second level of the abyss, Samuel revealed something: this city had originally been his. He couldn't even remember how many years he had spent locked in that prison. What he did remember was that everything changed the moment they discovered that place overflowing with crystals and demonic power. That discovery set everything into motion. A group calling themselves the Divine Race had marched in with an army and taken what wasn't theirs. The demons had been building their home and were caught completely off guard, annihilated before they could even respond. The territory was looted. The survivors were turned into slaves. The invaders then rebuilt the location into what it was now, the Celestial City, split across 2 levels. The upper level, reserved exclusively for the Divine Race, a place of luxury and indulgence. The lower level, however, existed for one purpose: to imprison anyone who dared resist the Divine Revolution. Samuel and his followers were among the very first to be thrown down there. To keep them contained, the enemy erected a barrier on the upper level, a permanent seal that trapped everyone below with no way out. And from that day forward, the enslaved had worked without rest, day after day, sustaining the comfortable lives of those living above them. Some were used as something even worse: living energy sources, their very souls drained to keep the city running. All of it just to keep that city floating on the backs of everyone who had lost the war. After so many years, so much suffering, some had forgotten their own names and the lives they once lived. Samuel quietly acknowledged if the Divine Race hadn't considered him too dangerous to break the same way, he might have ended up like the rest. After taking all of that in, Bai said what he truly believed: this floating city was the most honest reflection of how the world actually worked. Those at the top lived in comfort, watching over and exploiting those beneath them. Among humans, true justice didn't exist. But then he noted something practical: if all the city's energy was concentrated underground, that actually made his plan easier to execute. He gave the order: Samuel would free all the enslaved and destroy the energy furnace. Meanwhile, Bai would head back to the surface and take out the barrier sealing the demons in. Samuel pushed back. The boy simply wasn't strong enough to destroy the magic barrier. Even Samuel himself, the Demon King, didn't possess that kind of power. But Bai was calm about it. He stated that he wasn't going in alone. Before entering this place, he had already made preparations. He declared plainly, from the moment he agreed to come down here, freeing Samuel had already been part of the plan, and he intended to see it through. The move was to bring down the city's main tower. That collapse would create the breach the demons needed to reclaim their ancient home. Cutting back to the hunting competition, the group of privileged students was getting absolutely demolished by the final boss. They had watched their leader go down first, and that sight alone had left them shaken to the core. But one of the young men tried to hold the group together. He said it straight: their only shot at surviving was sticking together and fighting as one. Another one wasn't having it. As a noble, he made his position very clear: his role was to give orders, not to fight. He deeply regretted ever accepting this mission. If he'd known it would go this badly, he would never have shown up, and this was no ordinary monster they were dealing with. So he wasn't about to stand around waiting to become the next casualty, and he was definitely not putting his life on the line for tournament prize money. Annoyed, the young man who had stepped up snapped back. He wasn't here for the money either. He wasn't here by choice at all. A flashback revealed what actually brought him to that tournament. The Divine Guild had shown up at his home right before the competition began. They informed him that his wife had been selected to participate in the hunting competition. He'd explained everything. His wife had just given birth, she was still breastfeeding, and he offered to take her place instead. The Divine Guild member didn't care. They warned him that refusing a direct order was considered a grave offense and questioned whether he and his family were prepared to face the consequences of that. Back in the present, the young man stated what this competition really was: not a sport, not a tournament. It was a massacre orchestrated by the Divine Race purely for the entertainment of others. Everyone out there was just a toy for the gods to play with. Up in the skybox, the rotund nobleman laughed at the participants below, visibly entertained by their fear. The twins agreed enthusiastically. They were hoping the boss would wipe out all the weaklings. As far as they were concerned, this was the most entertaining hunting competition they had ever watched. Back in the fight, a woman was desperately trying to hide from the monster. She was completely overwhelmed, pure, paralyzing dread. This was the wife of the young man who had been summoned in her place. Both of them had been forced into this competition, even though she had just given birth. Her husband tried to throw himself in front of an incoming attack to protect her, but doing so put him in serious danger. Then, from a distance, someone launched an attack against the monster. It backfired, the monster only got angrier and it hurled the young man away with brutal force. His wife, already on the edge, was pushed into complete shock. She couldn't move. And she wasn't the only one of the spoiled noble boys had also frozen up, desperately trying to hide. The young man tried to fight through the pain, desperate to protect his wife, but his body wasn't cooperating. He could barely move. And then another figure entered the battlefield. It was Ganix, the same one who had attacked the monster a moment earlier. He attacked again, this time using his ice powers in an attempt to contain the creature. The spoiled boy recognized him immediately. Ganix, the top-ranked participant in the competition, the noble boys collectively decided they were safe now. But Ganix said something that shut all of that down. From the moment they stepped onto this battlefield, everyone's fate had already been decided. No one was leaving this place alive, because this was exactly the kind of game the gods enjoyed watching. Then Ganix's communicator crackled to life, his boss's voice coming through on the other end, demanding to know who authorized him to ruin the noble's entertainment. Up in the skybox, one of the twins complained because of the Jin family's dog sticking his nose in, the fun was over too soon. But the fat nobleman smirked, he had an idea, and he wanted to know if they were ready for something even more entertaining. Through the communicator, he ordered Ganix to stand down immediately, and as punishment for his interference, he demanded that Ganix personally eliminate the woman, right in front of every other player. Back to Bai Yi, he laid out his entire plan. And at that moment, Samuel observed that Belphegor's chosen one was, in fact, quite something else. He acknowledged that he had made a promise to the boy but had not yet delivered on it. So Samuel took the initiative. He decided to give the protagonist something in advance, a gift, as thanks for freeing him. The Demon King explained that the young man's heart had the ability to absorb all elemental forces. Though Samuel did exactly what that implied. He poured every ounce of power he had accumulated over the years directly into the protagonist. Bai Yi felt it the moment it hit, the energy rushing in and being absorbed. A new class unlocked, and with it, the power of lightning. On top of that, Samuel handed him a ring, explaining that it functioned as an infinite space storage item. But the ring had a second function. It contained a voice transmitter, meaning if Bai Yi called into the ring, Samuel would pinpoint his location instantly, no matter where he was in the world. Samuel would hear it, know he was asking for help, and come to him. Then Samuel shared something more personal. His original name had been Samuel, but now he went by Liu Yun. The name had changed after certain events, and it wasn't something he shared freely. Only the people he truly trusted ever heard it. Bai Yi promised to keep it. But time was running short, and he knew it. He announced he was heading up, and as soon as the barrier came down, he instructed the Demon King to get everyone out of that place immediately. He called his bird and got ready to move. Liu Yun called after him. Next time they met, he would host a proper celebratory feast. Bai Yi accepted and took off. Both of them were committed to this mission, and beyond that, they were both more than ready to flip the gods' playground upside down. Back at the hunting grounds, the young man was pleading with Ganix to help his wife. Meanwhile, Ganix's boss was pushing hard in the opposite direction. Ganix reached up and pulled the communicator right out of his ear and crushed it. He wasn't following those orders. He turned to everyone and told them to get out fast. He would buy them time. Up in the skybox, the chubby nobleman watched his subordinate's little act of defiance, and he was livid. Even the twins were stunned that Ganix had actually rebelled. And just like that, the chubby man declared that the moment he got his hands on his dog again, he would personally eliminate him. Shortly after, one of the twins caught something odd. Bai Yi's name had reappeared in the rankings, which meant the protagonist was still alive. Speaking of which, Bai Yi had just emerged from the dark forest. He had seen it clearly from the start. This competition was never anything more than entertainment for the nobility. Demons and awakened alike, anyone who stepped into this arena was nothing but a pawn in the hands of the gods. But Bai Yi had found a way to change the equation. He was going to make the nobles themselves players in this game. He reflected on it. This world was like an enormous forest. Once you fell under the gods' control, you never found the right way out. In his previous life, he had lived in the shadow of their lies, believing every word. Now, with the memory of all of it returned to him, he could see every mistake he had made with painful clarity. Then he located it, the creature serving as the source of the evil energy that generated the forest's mist. He absorbed its energy, the same energy that, when released into the air, was responsible for the vast illusions blanketing the entire forest. But Bai Yi recognized the truth of it. This creature wasn't some wild beast, it was just another one of the divine race's prisoners. Then the narrative shifted, a flashback pulling us somewhere else entirely. We see Hello as a young child, being shaken awake by her brother in the middle of the night. He told her to get up and follow him, no questions. They squeezed into a hiding spot together and her brother told her to stay quiet. Not a sound, she didn't understand what was happening. Not until she heard it, a strange sound coming from just outside their hiding spot. And then she realized it was a monster. And then her eyes found something worse, her parents lying on the ground. She understood, in the way that a child shouldn't have to understand, they were gone. The creature moved closer to where the siblings were hidden. The danger was immediate. Back in the present, Hello jolted awake from the nightmare. Bai Yi was there to steady her. He explained that the forest mist had gotten to her, but she was safe now. Still rattled, Hello tried to piece together what had just happened. Bai Yi kept his tone calm and reassured her it would all be over soon. Up in the noble's box, the room went tense the moment Bai Yi's name reappeared in the system. The twins found the timing almost funny. At the exact moment the Jin family's subordinate chose to rebel, their greatest rival had come back from the dead. Unlike the twins, the rotund nobleman was not amused. He felt humiliated by how the entire situation had unraveled. And so he made a demand. He ordered Thebes to release the demonic stimulant. The prince immediately raised the alarm. The substance was far too dangerous. A rank B lord who used it could suffer severe consequences. The rotund nobleman made it clear he didn't care about the risks. He just wanted everyone inside that barrier eliminated. All of them. Thebes pushed back, reluctant to give the order. The chubby man, increasingly furious, tried to pressure him and even made a play to get the twins on his side. The twins, finding the whole thing amusing, didn't object. The chubby man's own sister tried to talk him down, but he completely ignored her. He declared he had the majority and demanded that Thebes hand over the stimulant. Backed into a corner, Prince Thebes stated that he would comply. The chubby man then ordered the ranking system to be shut down. Points didn't matter anymore. What he wanted to see now was pure chaos. The stimulant was released into the air. The players on the ground had no idea what was happening, but the monster that Ganix had been holding back inhaled the stimulant drifting through the air, and it shattered through the ice, restraining it almost instantly. With the stimulant flowing through it, the creature's power spiked dramatically. A boss that was already a nightmare to fight had just become something far worse. It started consuming the surrounding trees, pulling energy directly out of them. And it wasn't alone. The stimulant had affected the other monsters in the area too. Ganix, however, understood exactly what was happening before anyone else did. The nobles were trying to kill everyone inside the barrier, every single person. In the private box, the chubby man declared it plainly. This was the consequence of his dog's disobedience. He said his subordinate should have never thought about slipping out of his control, because going against him was the same as going against the gods themselves. But then something happened that no one in that box was prepared for. A system alert announced it. The divine barrier security was failing. Protection would be deactivated shortly. The chubby man's confidence evaporated instantly. He demanded to know what was causing this. Before anyone could answer, the barrier collapsed entirely, and the monsters that had been contained inside began to pour out freely. The twins lost their composure completely, demanding the problem be fixed immediately. Even Prince Thebes, usually the calmest person in the room, looked shaken, trying to process the idea that someone had actually destroyed the celestial city's protection. The boss monster, no longer constrained by the barrier, immediately found a more appealing target. It locked onto the chubby man. And he was absolutely terrified. Here's some context on how that city stayed in the air. The entire floating system relied on a complex energy network powering its thrusters. An underground furnace fed by crystals mined in the region served as the main power source. A second backup storage system held enough energy to keep the city airborne for at least a full month. So if the main system ever failed, the backup would kick in automatically and keep everything running. In theory, the city was designed to float indefinitely. The engineer responsible had personally guaranteed that even under direct attack from invaders, the city would have enough power to remain operational. At the time, the king had dismissed the concern entirely. No one would dare attack the divine city. There was nothing to worry about. And now, in the present, the nobles were discovering just how wrong that assumption had been. The prince understood what the barrier's failure meant. It was a clear sign that the main energy furnace had been destroyed. What he couldn't figure out was who could possibly have done it. What the prince didn't know was that the Demon King had been freed and was currently leading a full rebellion from underground. The rebellion's leader confirmed the furnace's destruction and handed the rest of the task off to his allies. The moment the main furnace went offline, the backup power source activated automatically, and with that, the selective barrier resumed operation. The nobles who had just been trembling allowed themselves a brief exhale of relief. They convinced themselves it had just been a scare, but moments later the backup power source was destroyed too. And with nothing left holding it up, the city's levitation system ceased to function entirely. People in the lower sections watched in disbelief as the upper cabin came crashing down. The moment the cabin hit the ground, the chubby man was in a full panic, screaming about what was happening to the city's power. Thebes, thinking it through, concluded this was no accident. Someone had deliberately targeted both power sources. This was intentional. At the city's center, the tower housing the backup power system was visibly shaking. The guards stationed there couldn't stop what was happening. Because the one doing it wasn't a rebel fighter or a siege weapon, it was a monster with the specific ability to absorb energy. The same monster the protagonist had previously captured and converted into one of his allies. It had drained the city's entire reserve completely dry, and then it reported back to its master the order had been carried out perfectly. Bai received the message, but he knew this was only the first move. Hello, still groggy and shaken, asked what had happened while she was out. One look at the monsters moving erratically around her made it obvious things had completely spiraled out of control. She wasn't the only one noticing. Every other player on the field had picked up on the shift too. The barrier was gone, which meant, for the first time, they could actually leave. The catch, the monsters could cross just as freely as they could. The chubby man screamed for a divine squad to be deployed immediately. Meanwhile, he himself was sprinting away from a monster that had decided he was the most interesting target, demanding anyone do something about it. The twins, in the meantime, had gone into hiding, banking on their bodyguards to keep them breathing. The nobles, reduced to relying entirely on their servants to survive. The prince had Lin Feng by his side. Thebes looked at everything unfolding around him and arrived at one conclusion. After all this time, someone had actually had the audacity to rebel against the divine race. The nobles' servants managed to get chains around the monster, but the chubby man told them not to kill it. He wanted it to suffer for daring to come after him. They resorted to electric shocks to keep it subdued. Meanwhile, Bai was using every second of that distraction. He reflected whether it was fearsome monsters or arrogant humans, anyone who ended up in the Jin family grandson's hands became a toy, nothing more. Bai saw the chubby man for what he was, a perfect embodiment of everything ignorant and cruel about the divine race. So he decided to balance things out. With a single move, he eliminated the final boss and made his declaration. The game finally had a winner. The chubby man, absolutely furious, demanded to know who gave Bai permission to kill his new pet. While he was still busy fuming at the protagonist, the floating city began to lose altitude. The nobles felt it. Fear crept back in. The prince, reassessing everything, started to suspect this was more than a rebellion. And in a way, he wasn't wrong. Nobody had expected the city's supporting pillars to come down this easily. For the nobles, it was a waking nightmare. Everything was coming apart. The prince kept trying to make sense of it. Could this truly be the work of rebels? Then the demon king Liu Yun emerged from the abyss in dragon form with his allies rising up behind him. In doing so, he wasn't just making an entrance. He was declaring war against the divine race's dominion.